Hello, Midnight Wanderers, and welcome to Netheric Horror. This is where ancient whispers rise beneath a crimson sky, carrying you softly into the world of dreams and shadows. Before tonight's haunting story begins, tell me, what corner of the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. And if the silence of the night calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll never miss the moon's next dark secret. I was about 8 years old when something happened that I have never been able to explain. Decades have passed since that night, and I've spent most of my life trying to convince myself there must have been a logical explanation. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe my imagination filled in details that weren't really there. Maybe my memory changed over the years. But no matter how much time passes, the memory has remained incredibly clear. If ghosts truly exist, then I honestly believe that's what I saw. This happened in the late 1960s, a very different time from today. Kids had far more freedom than they probably should have. During the summer and school breaks, my brothers and I spent most of our time outside. As long as we were home by morning and didn't get into serious trouble, our parents rarely worried too much about where we were. Like a lot of kids back then, we thought sneaking out in the middle of the night was the greatest adventure imaginable. We weren't dangerous kids. We weren't breaking into houses or hurting anyone. Our idea of excitement was harmless mischief. Sometimes we'd quietly move campaign signs from different yards and pile them all together in one place. Other times we'd carry a for sale sign across the neighborhood and stick it in front of our school principal's house just to confuse people. We thought those things were hilarious. Looking back now, they were harmless childhood pranks. One particular night, my two older brothers had already climbed out through the family room window. That window was our usual escape route because it was easy to open quietly without waking our parents. I was just about to follow them when I realized I had forgotten something in my bedroom. I don't even remember what it was anymore. Maybe a flashlight. Maybe a jacket. Whatever it was seemed important enough that I turned around and hurried back to get it. After grabbing it, I started walking back toward the family room. The house was completely dark. Everyone else appeared to be asleep. I quietly rounded the corner, expecting to see the open window waiting for me. Instead, someone was lying on our couch. At first, my brain assumed it had to be my father, but almost immediately I realized something wasn't right. The man looked old, much older than my dad. He was lying on his back, apparently asleep. One hand rested across his stomach. Balanced there was an ashtray. Between his fingers was a lit cigarette. The ash hanging from the end was unusually long, as though it had been burning untouched for quite some time. The room was completely silent. He never moved. He never opened his eyes. He simply lay there sleeping. Then I noticed the most impossible part. I could see through him, not just a little. Completely, the couch behind him was visible straight through his body. Even stranger, the couch pattern I could see through him wasn't the same pattern our couch actually had. It was different. It looked like an older design. That detail has stayed with me all these years because it made absolutely no sense. Everything about him looked incredibly real. The wrinkles on his face, the cigarette, the ashtray, the position of his arms, everything except the fact that he wasn't completely solid. For a moment, I simply stared. My entire body froze. I wanted to scream. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not even a whisper. It was as though my voice had completely disappeared. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe only a few seconds. It felt much longer. The instant my body finally started moving again, I turned and ran. I sprinted down the hallway back to my bedroom as fast as I possibly could. I practically dove into bed. Then I pulled the blankets completely over my head. I stayed there shaking, convinced that if I looked out from under the covers, the old man would somehow be standing beside my bed. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. The next morning, my oldest brother immediately noticed something had happened. He asked why I had suddenly disappeared the night before instead of climbing out the window with him. I told him exactly what I had seen. An old man sleeping on the couch, smoking a cigarette. Transparent naturally, he laughed. He didn't believe a word of it. Honestly, I don't blame him. If someone had told me the same story, I probably wouldn't have believed it either. After that, I stopped talking about it. Months went by. I still thought about that night almost every day. Eventually, I decided to tell my father. For some reason, I didn't tell him the story exactly the way it happened. I was worried he'd think I was making everything up. So instead, I made up a small excuse. I told him I had gotten out of bed during the night because I needed to use the bathroom. Then I said, I thought I'd heard something in the family room. From there, I described the old man exactly as I remembered seeing him. I expected my dad to laugh, just like my brother had. Instead, his expression changed. He became very quiet. Then he told me something I had never heard before. When I was around 3 years old, our family had temporarily moved away from the house for several months. During that time, they rented the house to another family. While they were living there, something tragic happened. According to my father, the man renting the house suffered a fatal heart attack. He died in our family room. My father explained that the man had been an extremely heavy smoker. He smoked constantly. Late at night, he often sat on the couch watching television with cigarettes one after another. Apparently, he smoked so much that he frequently fell asleep while watching TV. One morning, his wife came into the room and found that he had passed away during the night. As my father told me the story, I remember feeling cold all over. Every detail seemed strangely familiar. The couch, the cigarette, the fact that he had apparently fallen asleep while smoking. It matched what I remembered seeing. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. I could tell my father was unsettled. He tried to come up with a logical explanation. He suggested that maybe I had overheard neighborhood kids talking about the man's death years earlier without realizing it. Maybe the story had stayed buried in my subconscious until it appeared as a dream. The problem with that explanation was simple. Nobody really talked about it. Back then, people in our neighborhood believed discussing the dead brought bad luck. It wasn't the kind of story adults shared around children. As far as I knew, I'd never heard anything about the previous tenant before that conversation with my father. Even today, I can't say with certainty what happened that night. Maybe I experienced an unusually vivid dream. Maybe my young imagination somehow created a story that later happened to match real events. Maybe my memory connected unrelated details over the years. Those explanations are certainly possible. But one thing has never changed: the memory itself. I still remember exactly how the room looked. I still remember the cigarette burning quietly. I still remember the impossibly long ash. I still remember the ashtray balanced on the man's stomach. Most of all, I remember being able to see straight through him. That image has never faded. As the years passed, I've heard countless ghost stories from other people. Most of them don't affect me very much. Some are entertaining. Some are probably misunderstandings. Some are impossible to verify. Mine is the only one I know firsthand. I'm not asking anyone else to believe it. In fact, I completely understand why people would be skeptical. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I would probably question it too. All I know is that one night, as an 8-year-old boy quietly trying to sneak out of the house, I turned the corner, expecting to climb out a window. Instead, I found an old man peacefully sleeping on our couch with a cigarette still burning in his hand. Months later, I learned that years before I could even remember living there, a man matching that exact description had died in that very room after falling asleep while smoking. Whether what I saw was a ghost, a dream, or something my mind somehow created, I honestly don't know. But if there has ever been one moment in my life that made me question everything I thought I knew, it was that night. Even after all these decades, I can still picture him exactly as clearly as I did when I was 8 years old. And I've never forgotten him. This happened to me and my mom back when I still lived with my parents. It was not some old abandoned house in the woods or some strange place with a dark history. It was just our normal family home. The kind of place where every sound was familiar, every room had its own smell, and every corner felt safe because we had lived there for so long. That is what made the whole thing so hard to explain. Nothing about that day felt different at first. It was just a regular day at home, the kind of day where nothing interesting was supposed to happen. My mom was cleaning the house that afternoon. She had decided to mop the hallway, and since the hallway floor had to dry, she told me I needed to pick a room and stay there until she was finished. The bedrooms had carpet, so those were not a problem, but the hallway itself had hard flooring. Once it was wet, she did not want anybody walking across it and leaving marks. She was very strict about that kind of thing. If she had just cleaned something, she wanted it to stay clean, even if it was only for a few minutes. The layout of the hallway was simple, but it matters for the story. From that hallway, 5 rooms connected in a straight line. First was the living room, then my bedroom, then the bathroom, then my sister's room, and finally my parents' bedroom at the end. That was the order. There was no hidden side hallway, no extra door, and no way to cross from one room to another without stepping into the hallway. If you were in one room and wanted to go to another, you had to use that hallway. I chose to stay in the living room because it made the most sense. The living room had a door that led out to the backyard, and our dog liked to go in and out a lot. If I stayed there, I could keep the dog with me, let her outside if she needed to go, and make sure she did not run into the wet hallway. I knew if the dog walked over the fresh mop marks, my mom would be just as annoyed as if I had done it myself. So I stayed in the living room and kept an eye on her. My mom started mopping from the living room side of the hallway. She worked her way down toward her bedroom at the end. I remember hearing the mop sliding across the floor, the bucket moving, and her footsteps as she backed up, little by little. The smell of floor cleaner filled the house. It was one of those strong, lemony smells that makes everything feel freshly washed, but also makes the air feel a little too sharp. I stayed where I was supposed to stay, sitting in the living room with the dog near me. The dog was calm that day. She was not barking or acting nervous. She was just hanging around like normal, sometimes lying down, sometimes walking over to the backyard door to sniff at it. I opened the door for her when she wanted to go out, and I made sure she stayed with me. I knew my mom would be upset if she saw paw prints in the hallway, so I was careful. I did not even step near the edge of the hallway. I stayed back in the living room like I had been told. After some time passed, I figured the floor might be dry enough. I could not see much of the hallway from where I was sitting, but I knew my mom had started near me and ended near her room. I called out and asked her if I could walk across yet. I did not want to get in trouble for stepping on the wet floor, so I waited for permission. She did not answer right away. Then I heard her moving around in her room, and I knew she was checking. A few seconds later, she yelled at me. She sounded angry, the kind of angry a parent gets when they think you did exactly what they told you not to do. She asked me why I had walked down the hallway. I was confused because I had not moved from the living room at all. I told her I had been with the dog the whole time. I had not gone into the hallway, not even once. I thought maybe she had seen something wrong or misunderstood, but she kept insisting that someone had walked on the floor. At first, I thought maybe the dog had slipped past me without me noticing, but that did not make sense. The dog was right there in the living room with me. I had been watching her the entire time because that was the whole reason I picked that room. Also, if the dog had walked down the hallway, there would have been paw prints, not human footprints. My mom was not yelling about paw prints. She was yelling like she had seen shoe or foot marks on the clean floor. I got up, still staying careful, and looked toward the hallway. My mom was standing near her bedroom, looking down at the floor. Her expression had changed a little by then. She still looked annoyed, but there was also something else in her face. She looked confused, maybe even a little uneasy. I asked her what she was talking about, and she told me to come look. So I did, but I was careful not to step on the hallway floor until I could see what she meant. That was when I saw the footprints. They were clear on the freshly mopped floor. Not smudges, not random watermarks, not the kind of marks a mop leaves when it dries unevenly. They were footprints, and they went from the living room side of the hallway all the way down toward my mom's room. They looked like someone had walked straight through after the floor had been mopped. The prints were spaced like normal steps, one foot, then the other, leading away from where I had been sitting. For a second, I just stared at them. My brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but it could not. I knew I had not walked there. My mom knew she had been at the other end. My sister was not walking around. Nobody else was home. The dog had been with me. There was no other person in the house who could have made those prints. And even if someone had been there, we would have heard them. The house was not that big, and the hallway was in the middle of everything. My mom said again that I must have walked through. She sounded less sure this time, but she was still trying to find a normal explanation. I understood why. It was easier to blame me than to accept that there were footprints in the hallway that neither of us could explain. I told her again that I had not moved. I reminded her that from her bedroom, she had a direct view toward the living room. If I had walked from the living room down the hallway, she would have seen me. That was true. From her bedroom, especially with the way the doorway and window were placed, she could see toward the living room area. There was also a window in her room that reflected part of the hallway. I had noticed it before. If someone moved through the hallway, the reflection could catch it. So if I had walked across that floor, my mom would have seen me either directly or in the reflection. But she had not seen me. She had only seen the footprints after they were already there. I stepped closer, careful to avoid the wet parts, and looked down at the prints. Something about them seemed wrong. At first, I thought maybe they were mine because I was the person closest to where they started. But when I put my foot next to one of them, my stomach dropped. The footprint was much smaller than mine. It was clearly not my size. It was not even close. It looked about half the size of my foot. That made everything worse. I have the smallest feet in my family. That was something everyone knew. My sister's feet were bigger than mine. My mom's were bigger than mine. My dad's were definitely bigger. So if the footprints were too small to be mine, they could not belong to anyone else in the house either. They looked like they belonged to a child, or at least someone much smaller than any of us. But there was no child in the house. There was nobody else there at all. My mom stopped arguing after that. She looked down at my foot beside the print, then back at the line of footprints on the floor. I could see her trying to find an answer. Maybe the mop had made them somehow. Maybe the floor cleaner had dried in a strange pattern. Maybe old marks had come back through the water. But none of those thoughts worked. The prints were too clean, too shaped, too perfectly spaced. They looked fresh. They looked like someone had just walked through while the floor was still damp. The strangest part was where they started. They began at the living room side of the hallway, close to where I had been sitting. If someone had been in the living room with me, I would have seen them. The room was open. There was no place for a person to hide and then walk past me without me noticing. The backyard door was there too, but I had been watching the dog and using that door. Nobody came in from outside. Nobody opened it, except me, and the dog never reacted. That is one of the parts I still think about. Dogs notice things before people do. They hear little sounds. They smell people. They react to strangers. But our dog had been calm the entire time. She did not bark. She did not growl. She did not stare down the hallway. She did not run to the door or act like someone had come inside. She behaved like nothing had happened. Either there was nothing for her to sense, or whatever made those prints was not something she understood as a normal person. My mom and I stood there in silence for a little while. The house felt different then. A few minutes earlier, it had just been a clean hallway and a normal afternoon. Now the air felt heavy. Even the smell of the floor cleaner seemed stronger. The wet shine on the floor reflected the light from the rooms, and the small footprints looked darker against it. They were not deep, of course. They were just wet marks. But they felt too real. My mom eventually told me to stay back while she checked the rooms. She looked in my bedroom, then the bathroom, then my sister's room. There was nothing there. No open windows, no person hiding, no sign that anyone had moved through. She checked her room too, even though she had been in there. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. The house was quiet. The only strange thing was the hallway floor. I remember feeling frustrated because I knew how impossible it looked. From my mom's point of view, I was the only one who could have done it. I was sitting in the room where the prints seemed to begin, but I also knew I had not done it. I knew I had stayed in the living room with the dog the whole time. There was no gap in my memory, no moment where I could have walked out and forgotten. I had not stepped into the hallway at all. I also remember feeling scared in a way I did not want to admit. It was not the kind of fear where you scream or run. It was quieter than that. It was the fear of seeing something that should not be there. Something small, simple, and impossible. A footprint is such an ordinary thing. People leave footprints all the time. But when a footprint appears where no person could have walked, it feels wrong in a way that is hard to explain. My mom cleaned the hallway again after that. She did not talk much while she did it. I think she wanted to erase the prints as fast as possible. Maybe she wanted the house to feel normal again. Maybe she thought if the marks were gone, we could stop thinking about them. I stayed in the living room, watching her mop over the footprints one by one. The little marks disappeared under the mop, but the feeling they left behind did not disappear with them. After she finished, she told me again not to walk on the floor until it dried. Her voice was calmer, but I could tell she was still bothered. I promised her I would not move. This time, I sat even farther away from the hallway. I kept the dog right beside me. I watched the opening like I expected someone to step out, even though there was nobody there. Every tiny sound in the house suddenly seemed louder. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the walls, the faint sounds from outside. I noticed all of it. Nothing else happened that day. No doors opened on their own, no voices spoke, no shadow moved across the hallway. The floor dried normally, and eventually the house went back to looking like it always did. But for me, it did not feel the same after that. I kept thinking about those small footprints. I kept seeing them in my mind, lined up neatly on the wet floor, leading from the living room toward my parents' bedroom. I asked my mom about it later, but she never had an answer. She did not like talking about it much. She would usually say something like, "I don't know what that was," and then change the subject. I think it scared her too, though she did not want to make a big deal out of it. Parents often try to act calm when strange things happen, especially in front of their kids. But I had seen her face when she realized the footprints were smaller than mine. I knew she could not explain it either. For a while, I tried to come up with my own explanations. Maybe there had been old footprints on the floor from before, and the mop water somehow made them show up. But that did not fit, because they appeared after she had mopped, not before. Maybe the dog had made strange marks that looked like human feet, but they were not paw prints, and the dog had been with me. Maybe someone had been in the house without us knowing. But there was no sign of that, and nobody could have moved through the hallway without being seen. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. What bothered me most was the size. If the prints had been my size, maybe I could have doubted myself. Maybe I could have wondered if I had taken a few steps without thinking. If they had been my mom's size, maybe she could have blamed herself. But they were smaller than mine, and I had the smallest feet in the house. That detail took away every easy answer. It meant the prints belonged to someone who should not have been there. Even now, I do not know what we saw. I do not know if it was something paranormal, some strange trick of water and light, or something else completely. I only know what happened. My mom mopped the hallway. I stayed in the living room with the dog. No one else was home. Then footprints appeared on the wet floor, walking from where I was sitting all the way toward my mom's room. When I placed my foot beside one, it was clearly much smaller than mine. And the worst part is, whoever left them walked right past me. I never saw anyone. I never heard anyone. The dog never reacted. My mom never saw anyone in the hallway, even though she should have had a clear view. All we had were those small, wet footprints on the clean floor, there for only a few minutes before my mom wiped them away. But I still remember them. I remember the shape, the size, and the quiet feeling in the house when we both realized they could not belong to anyone there. That was the day I learned that sometimes the scariest things are not loud. They do not always slam doors or whisper your name in the dark. Sometimes they leave something simple behind, something small enough to ignore if you are not paying attention. Sometimes they leave footprints. Last summer, I went to Paris with my sister and one of her friends. It was supposed to be one of those trips we would always remember for good reasons. We had talked about it for weeks before going. We had made loose plans, saved places on our phones, and imagined ourselves walking through pretty streets, eating pastries, taking photos, and seeing all the famous places people always talk about. Paris was beautiful, of course, but it was also tiring in a way I had not expected. The city was busy, loud, and full of movement. Every street seemed to lead to another place we wanted to see, and every time we thought we were done walking, we ended up walking even more. We were staying in a hotel room that was not huge, but it was comfortable enough for the three of us. It had one double bed for my sister and her friend, and then there was a sofa bed for me. The sofa bed was pulled out near the TV, so I was the closest one to it. The room had that simple hotel feeling, with plain walls, clean sheets, a small table, a lamp, and a television sitting across from the beds. Nothing about the room looked old or creepy. It did not feel haunted when we first walked in. It just felt like a normal hotel room, the kind you forget about as soon as you leave. The TV was near my side of the room, but none of us really cared about it. We were in Paris, so watching television was not exactly on our list of things to do. From the moment we arrived, we were either outside exploring or getting ready to go back outside. We did not even look for the remote. I honestly do not remember seeing it anywhere in the room. It was not on the bedside table, not on the desk, not on the sofa bed, and not near the TV. At the time, that did not matter. We had no reason to use the TV anyway. That day had been especially long. We had spent hours walking around Paris, going from one place to another, trying to fit in as much as we could. I remember my feet hurting so much by the end of the day that every step back to the hotel felt heavier than the last. My sister and her friend were just as tired. We had been laughing and talking earlier, but by the time we got back to the room, we were all quiet in that tired way people get after a long day of traveling. We were too worn out to do anything except wash up, change into comfortable clothes, and get into bed. The hotel room felt peaceful at first. Outside, there were faint city sounds, but nothing too loud. Paris did not go completely silent at night, but from inside the room, everything felt distant. There might have been the sound of a car passing once in a while, or the low hum of the building. But that was it. The lights in the room were turned off, except maybe for a tiny bit of light coming through the curtains from the street outside. It was not completely dark, but it was dim enough that the room felt calm. My sister and her friend took the double bed, and I settled onto the sofa bed near the TV. I remember feeling lucky and unlucky at the same time. The sofa bed was not as comfortable as the real bed, but I was too exhausted to complain. At that point, I could have slept almost anywhere. The mattress was thin, the blanket was not perfect, and I was close to the television. But I did not care. I just wanted to sleep. My body felt heavy, and my mind was already shutting down. We went to sleep earlier than we normally would have. I think all three of us were asleep pretty quickly. There was no scary feeling before it happened. No strange noise in the walls. No footsteps outside the door. No weird shadows moving in the room. Nothing like that. It was just a normal night after a long day. That is part of what makes the memory so strange to me. There was no build-up, no warning, and no reason for us to expect anything unusual. Then, sometime around 1 in the morning, everything changed. I was deep asleep when the TV suddenly switched on by itself. It did not turn on quietly. It did not start with a soft click or a low sound. It came on at full volume, blasting static into the room like something had exploded right beside me. The sound was harsh and loud, that awful rushing noise of old television static, like a storm made of electricity. It filled the whole room in an instant. 1 second, there was silence, and the next second, the room was screaming with noise. I woke up in complete panic. I did not even understand what was happening at first. My heart jumped so hard, it felt like it hit my ribs. Because I was sleeping closest to the TV, the sound felt like it was right on top of me. The bright, flickering light from the screen flashed across the room, turning the walls and furniture pale and strange. For a moment, I could not tell where I was. I only knew that something loud and wrong had pulled me out of sleep. My sister and her friend woke up at the same time. They were both terrified, too. I heard them gasp and move suddenly in the bed. Nobody spoke clearly at first. It was just panic and confusion. The TV was still roaring with static, and because it was at full volume, it was hard to think. The screen showed nothing except black, white, and gray noise, flickering fast and lighting up the room in sharp flashes. It looked and sounded like something from an old horror movie. I jumped off my sofa bed and climbed onto the double bed with my sister and her friend. I know that sounds funny now, but at the time I was genuinely scared. I did not want to be the closest person to the TV anymore. The way it had turned on right beside me made me feel like it had singled me out somehow, even though I know that does not make sense. I just wanted to get away from it. So I scrambled onto their bed like a little kid, and for a few seconds, all three of us were just sitting there, staring at the TV. The whole room felt different in that moment. A few minutes earlier, it had been a normal hotel room. Now it felt unfamiliar, like we had woken up somewhere we were not supposed to be. The static was so loud that it seemed to shake the air. The flickering screen made the room look broken and unreal. Our shadows jumped across the walls. The corners of the room seemed darker than before. I could see the outline of the sofa bed where I had been sleeping, and the TV beyond it, glowing and hissing like it had a life of its own. After the first shock passed, we started looking for the remote. That was the obvious answer. Maybe one of us had rolled onto it somehow. Maybe it had been under the blanket or between the cushions. Maybe a button had been pressed by accident. We were tired and scared, so we looked around quickly, tossing blankets and checking the bed. But we could not find it, not anywhere. The remote was not on the double bed. It was not on my sofa bed. It was not on the floor where we could see it. It was not on the bedside table. That made the whole thing worse, because none of us had touched the TV the entire time we had been there. We had not turned it on when we arrived. We had not searched for channels. We had not used the remote. I do not even think we had seen the remote at all since checking into the room. The TV had just been there, ignored, like part of the furniture. So the idea that it suddenly turned on by itself in the middle of the night, at full volume, to nothing but static, made no sense. We kept asking each other where the remote was, but none of us knew. My sister was frightened, but she was also annoyed in that way people get when they are scared and want the problem to stop. Her friend looked just as shaken. I think all of us were hoping one of us would be brave enough to get up and deal with it, but nobody wanted to move. The TV was only a few feet away, but in that moment it felt much farther. The room was dark except for the screen, and the loud static made everything feel more intense than it should have. Eventually they told me I had to go turn it off because I was the one sleeping closest to it. I did not think that was fair, but I also knew someone had to do it. The sound was too loud to ignore, and we were in a hotel. I remember worrying that people in nearby rooms might wake up and complain. Still, I did not want to get off the bed. I kept staring at the TV, hoping it would turn off by itself just as suddenly as it had turned on. It did not. So, I finally got up. I moved slowly, like moving slower would somehow make it safer. My feet touched the floor, and I crossed the small space between the beds and the television. The static got louder the closer I got, and the light from the screen flashed over my hands and face. I tried not to look too closely at the screen because there was something deeply uncomfortable about it. It was just static, but when you are half asleep and scared, static can start to feel like more than static. It feels like there might be something behind it, something trying to come through. I reached the TV and looked for a button. It took me a moment because hotel TVs are never simple when you are panicking. The buttons were either on the side or underneath, and I had to feel around for them while the screen kept flashing right in front of me. I was scared the whole time that something else would happen, that the volume would get louder, or the picture would change, or I would see something in the reflection of the screen behind me. I know that sounds dramatic, but that is where my mind went in the moment. Finally, I found the power button, or some kind of control, and managed to turn the TV off. The static cut out, and the room dropped into silence so suddenly that it almost felt as shocking as the noise had been. For a second, none of us said anything. The screen went black, and the room became dark again. But it did not feel peaceful like before. It felt heavy, like the silence after a loud alarm. My ears were still ringing a little from how loud it had been. I hurried back to the double bed instead of going straight to my sofa bed. I did not want to lie down beside the TV again right away. My sister and her friend did not blame me. We all just sat there for a moment, looking at the dark screen. I think we were waiting to see if it would turn on again. Nobody wanted to say that out loud, but it was obvious. We were all staring at it, listening closely, expecting another sudden blast of static. But nothing happened. The TV stayed off. The room stayed quiet. Outside, the city sounds were faint again. Everything seemed normal, but none of us felt normal anymore. We talked in whispers for a little while, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe there had been a power surge. Maybe the hotel TV had some kind of timer. Maybe a previous guest had set an alarm. Maybe someone in another room had a remote that somehow connected to ours. We went through every idea we could think of, but none of them fully made sense. The timer idea bothered me because even if a timer had been set, why would the TV turn on to static? And why at full volume? We had never touched the TV, so we had not changed the channel or volume. If a previous guest had left it like that, why did it wait until 1 in the morning to come on? And if it was some hotel system, why would it happen only once? There were too many strange details. One strange thing can be explained away, but all of them together felt harder to ignore. The missing remote was the part I kept coming back to. If we had found it under the blanket, maybe we could have laughed it off. Maybe one of us rolled over it in our sleep. Maybe a button got pressed. But we never found the remote. Not then, not later that night. I remember checking around more carefully the next day, and I still do not remember seeing it. It was like the TV had no normal way of being controlled from where we were, and yet it had switched on by itself. Eventually, we tried to go back to sleep, but it was not easy. I went back to the sofa bed because there was nowhere else for me to sleep, but I did not turn my back to the TV. I lay there, facing it, watching the dark screen in the dim room. Every little sound made me tense. The building creaked. Someone in the hall might have moved. A car passed outside. And each time I wondered if the TV was about to come on again. I was exhausted, but my body stayed alert for a long time. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because morning came. The room looked normal again in daylight. That is one of the strange things about scary moments that happen at night. When the sun comes up, the place can look so ordinary that you almost feel silly for being afraid. The TV was just a TV. The sofa bed was just a sofa bed. The hotel room was just a hotel room in Paris. But all three of us remembered what had happened, and none of us thought it was funny. We talked about it again while getting ready that morning. My sister and her friend both confirmed the same thing I remembered. The TV had turned on suddenly at around 1 in the morning, at full volume, showing only static. None of us had touched it. None of us had seen the remote. None of us had done anything that could have caused it. We all woke up terrified at the same time. That made me feel a little better, because at least I knew I had not imagined it. We did not complain to the hotel staff, mostly because what would we even say? The TV turned on by itself and scared us? It sounded like the kind of thing that could be brushed off as a faulty television or some setting we did not understand. Maybe that is all it was. Maybe there really was a simple explanation. But even if there was, we never found it. And at the time, standing in that dark room with the static blasting and no remote anywhere, it did not feel simple at all. The rest of the trip was fine. Paris was still beautiful, and we kept visiting places and making memories. But that one night stayed in my mind. Whenever we came back to the room after that, I noticed the TV right away. I paid attention to it more than I wanted to. I would glance at it before sleeping, almost like I expected it to wake us again. It never did. It stayed off for the rest of our stay, which somehow made it even stranger. If it had been broken, I would have expected it to happen again. But it only happened once. To this day, I still have no idea how it happened. Maybe there was some technical issue. Maybe another remote somewhere triggered it. Maybe the hotel had old wiring, or a power surge caused it to turn on. I can accept that those are possible explanations, but none of them explain why it came on at full volume, why it showed only static, why we could not find the remote, or why it happened in the middle of the night when we were all asleep. I know it is not the most dramatic story. Nothing appeared in the room. No one knocked on the door. We did not see a ghost standing by the bed. But sometimes fear does not need much. Sometimes it is enough to be asleep in a strange city, in a hotel room you do not know, and wake up to a TV screaming static at full volume for no reason at all. That sound is what I remember most. The sudden blast of it. The way it filled the room before any of us could understand what was happening. The flickering light on the walls. The feeling of jumping out of my own bed and running to my sister's bed because I was too scared to stay near the screen. The silence after I finally turned it off was almost worse, because then we were left sitting there in the dark, wondering what had just woken us up. Even now, whenever I stay in a hotel room and there is a TV near the bed, I think about that night in Paris. I always look for the remote. I always check where the power button is. And sometimes, before I go to sleep, I glance at the screen and hope it stays black until morning. My boyfriend had been under a lot of stress from work, and I could see it wearing him down. He was not the kind of person who complained all the time, but I knew him well enough to notice when something was wrong. He had been coming home tired, quieter than usual, and even when we were together, it felt like his mind was still somewhere else. Work had been taking up so much of his energy that we had not really spent proper quality time together in a while. We were still seeing each other, of course, but it was not the same as actually being present with each other. Most evenings, one of us was tired, distracted, or just trying to get through the week. I started to feel like we needed a break. Not a huge vacation, not anything complicated, just a little time away from normal life. I wanted us to have a couple of days where he did not have to think about work, emails, deadlines, or whatever else had been making him feel so tense. I wanted to do something romantic, something quiet and peaceful, where we could just enjoy being together again. So I organized a small getaway to a lake not too far from where we lived. It was close enough that we did not have to deal with airports or long travel, but far enough that it felt like we were escaping. I chose a small inn near the lake, the kind of place that looked warm and cozy in the photos. It was above a pub, which made it feel even more charming to me. I imagined cold air outside, warm drinks inside, and both of us sitting somewhere by a fire, finally able to relax. When we arrived, it was even nicer than I had hoped. The inn was small, cozy, and full of that old countryside feeling. It was not fancy, but that was part of what made it perfect. The pub below had a fireplace that was lit at night, and the owner's dog would lie near it like he owned the whole place. He looked so relaxed, stretched out in the warmth, watching people come and go with sleepy eyes. It made the place feel homey right away. It was close to Christmas, which made everything feel even more beautiful. The air had that sharp winter cold to it, and all the lights and decorations made the area feel almost like something from a Christmas postcard. There is something about being near a lake in winter that feels peaceful in a different way. The water looks darker, the trees look bare, and the cold makes every warm place feel extra special. Everything about the trip had this calm, romantic feeling to it. For the first time in a while, I felt like my boyfriend was finally starting to unwind. He still looked tired, but not in the same heavy way. We walked around, talked, and enjoyed being away from our usual routine. It felt good to see him smile more. It felt good to have his attention again, without work constantly sitting between us. I remember feeling proud of myself for planning it, because it really did seem like exactly what we needed. In the afternoon, we decided to visit a nearby luxury hotel and spa. It was not where we were staying, but it was close enough that we could go there and use the sauna. I had heard it was beautiful, and since this was supposed to be a relaxing, romantic trip, it seemed like a good idea. I thought it would be nice for us to spend some time in the warmth, especially since it was so cold outside. A sauna, a quiet spa, maybe a drink afterward. It sounded perfect. The luxury hotel was stunning. It was an old mansion, the kind of building that immediately makes you feel like it has been there for generations. It had high ceilings, big windows, beautiful details, and that grand feeling old buildings sometimes have. It did not feel like a modern hotel where everything looks the same. It had character. It felt rich with history, but also warm and elegant. From the moment we walked in, I could tell it was the kind of place people went for special occasions. There were not many guests there that day. It was surprisingly quiet. A few people were around, but not many. Most of them seemed to be locals who had come in for food or drinks rather than people staying overnight. That made the hotel feel even more peaceful. It was not crowded or noisy. It felt calm, almost private, like we had discovered some hidden winter place just for ourselves. I especially loved the lobby. It was beautiful on its own, but what really stood out was the huge Christmas tree. It was gigantic, easily the first thing you noticed when you walked in. It reached up high into the lobby, covered in lights and decorations, glowing warmly against the old walls. It looked perfect there, like it belonged in that grand mansion. I remember looking at it and thinking how beautiful it was. It made the whole hotel feel magical. I could not help comparing it to the small inn where we were staying. I loved our inn, and I loved the fireplace in the pub and the dog sleeping beside it, but this hotel had a completely different kind of charm. It felt luxurious and romantic in a bigger, more dramatic way. The lobby, the spa, the old mansion, the Christmas tree, the quiet atmosphere. All of it felt like something from a winter holiday film. I remember thinking we should have paid a little more and stayed there instead. I even said something like that to my boyfriend. I regretted that we had not booked a room there. At the time, it felt like a simple, harmless regret. We were having such a nice time, and the place was so beautiful that I thought maybe I had chosen the wrong hotel. Not terribly wrong, because our inn was lovely, but still. I imagined what it would have been like to sleep in that old mansion, wake up there, walk through that lobby again in the morning, and spend the evening there instead of only visiting for a few hours. We used the sauna, and it was exactly what we needed. The heat felt amazing after being out in the cold. We sat there quietly for a while, letting the stress melt away. There was something calming about not having to talk much, just being there together. My boyfriend looked more relaxed than he had in weeks. I remember feeling happy, thinking the trip was working. We were away, we were together, and for a little while, work and stress felt very far away. After we finished at the spa, we went into the hotel bar. That was another thing that made the place feel special. The bar had bonfires installed in the middle of every table. I had never seen anything quite like it before. Each table had its own little fire burning in the center, making the whole room glow with warm light. It felt cozy and dramatic at the same time. The firelight reflected off the glasses and the furniture, and it made the room feel intimate, even though it was part of a large hotel. There were only a few people in the bar, so it was quiet. No loud crowds, no busy noise, just a calm winter atmosphere. A few guests were eating or drinking, and some looked like locals who had come in for the food. My boyfriend and I sat there, enjoying the warmth and the strange beauty of it. The small fire in the middle of our table made everything feel peaceful. I remember watching the flames move and thinking how pretty it all was. At that moment, nothing about the hotel felt dangerous. That is the part that still stays with me. Fire was everywhere in small, controlled ways. The bonfires and the tables, the warm lights, the Christmas decorations, the huge tree in the lobby. It all felt beautiful, festive, and safe. Fire was part of the charm. It made the place feel warm and romantic. It never crossed my mind that fire could become anything else there. It never crossed my mind that the same beauty I admired could turn deadly. We did not stay at the luxury hotel overnight. We only visited for the spa and the bar, then went back to our little inn above the pub. At the time, I still felt a little regretful. I thought about the mansion and its beautiful lobby, and I wished we had booked that place instead. But once we got back to the inn, I felt happy again. The pub was warm, the fireplace was going, and the owner's dog was still lying close to it like nothing in the world could bother him. It was cozy in a smaller, simpler way. The rest of our getaway was lovely. It gave us what we needed. My boyfriend seemed lighter, and I felt closer to him again. We spent time together without rushing. We enjoyed the lake, the winter air, the food, and the quiet. It was one of those short trips that feels longer in memory because it comes at the right time. When we went home, I felt grateful that we had done it. For the next couple of weeks, life went back to normal. Work started again. Our routines returned. The trip became a happy memory, something I could think back on when things felt busy. I still remembered the luxury hotel clearly, especially the huge Christmas tree in the lobby. I remembered how beautiful it looked, how much I had wished we had stayed there, and how romantic the whole place had seemed. Then, about 2 weeks later, I heard the news. The luxury hotel had burned down. At first, I could hardly believe it was the same place. It felt impossible. That beautiful old mansion, the quiet spa, the warm bar, the lobby with the enormous Christmas tree, all of it had been there so recently in my mind. I could still picture the building exactly as it had been when we walked through it. I could still remember standing in the lobby and admiring the tree. To hear that it had burned down felt unreal. Then I learned that people had died in the fire. A young couple had been killed. They were on a romantic getaway, just like we had been. That detail hit me harder than anything else. It was not just a tragic news story anymore. It felt suddenly, horribly close. They had been doing the same kind of thing we had done. Maybe they had gone there to escape stress, too. Maybe one of them had planned it as a surprise. Maybe they had admired that same Christmas tree. Maybe they had sat in that same bar or walked through that same lobby, feeling lucky to be there. The Christmas tree had caught fire. That was the part that made my stomach turn. The same gigantic tree I had loved so much, the same one I had stood there admiring, had become the source of the fire. I kept thinking about how beautiful it had looked. It had seemed so harmless, so festive, so perfect for that grand old lobby. I had thought it made the whole hotel feel magical. And then, only days later, it ended up killing 2 people. I could not stop thinking about it. I kept replaying our visit in my mind. We had been inside that hotel. We had walked through that lobby. We had been near that tree. I had wished we had stayed there. I had regretted not paying a little more for a room. I had actually thought we made the wrong choice by staying at the smaller inn instead. But if we had chosen differently, if we had booked that hotel, if our trip had been 2 weeks later instead of when it was, it could have been us. I know that sounds dramatic, but it is exactly where my mind went. The The couple who died were on a romantic getaway, just like us. They were not doing anything reckless. They were just staying in a beautiful hotel close to Christmas, probably expecting warmth, comfort, and a peaceful night away. That is what we had wanted too. That is what we had gone there for. The only difference was timing. Timing is such a strange thing. It can feel meaningless until something like that happens. We could have stayed there. We nearly did not, but we could have. I had even wished we had. I had looked around that hotel and thought it was better than where we were staying. I had wanted to be there overnight. And then the place burned down shortly after, killing people who had wanted the same kind of escape we had wanted. The thought still gives me chills. It is not only the sadness of what happened, though that is awful enough. It is the closeness of it. The feeling that we brushed against something terrible without knowing it. We walked through a place that would soon become a disaster scene. We admired something that would soon turn deadly. We sat in that hotel, feeling safe and romantic, completely unaware that within days it would be destroyed by fire. I also think about how normal everything felt when we were there. Nothing seemed wrong. No one looked worried. The staff were going about their jobs. Guests were eating and drinking. The fires in the bar were controlled and pretty. The Christmas tree was glowing in the lobby like it belonged there. If someone had told me that the tree would soon catch fire and the hotel would burn down, I would never have believed them. That is what makes the memory so unsettling. Some tragedies do not announce themselves. They sit quietly inside beautiful places. They hide behind warm lights, decorations, and soft music. They wait inside moments that feel peaceful. You can stand right beside the thing that will later cause disaster and have no idea. You can even admire it. After I heard what happened, my memory of the hotel changed. Before, it was a beautiful place we had visited on a romantic trip. Afterward, every part of it felt different. The big tree no longer looked magical in my mind. It looked dangerous. The warm glow of the lobby felt eerie. Even the bonfires and the tables, which had seemed so cozy at the time, became strange to think about. Fire had been part of the hotel's atmosphere, part of its charm, and then fire destroyed it. I felt guilty for thinking we should have stayed there. I know that does not make complete sense. I know I had no way of knowing what would happen. I know there was nothing wrong with admiring the hotel or wishing we had booked it. But after 2 people died there, that regret turned into something uncomfortable. It felt like I had wanted to step into a place that later became deadly. It felt like we had narrowly avoided something, even if the timing was different. The young couple stayed in my mind, too. I did not know them, but I felt connected to them in a sad way because of how similar their trip sounded to ours. I wondered if they had been happy when they arrived. I wondered if one of them had been stressed from work, too. I wondered if they had taken photos in front of the tree. I wondered if they had looked around the lobby and thought it was beautiful, the same way I had. Those thoughts made the story feel even heavier. Ever since then, I have never looked at big indoor Christmas trees the same way. I still think they are beautiful, but there is always a small part of me that remembers that hotel. I notice how close they are to lights, curtains, furniture, and old wood. I notice whether they look dry. I notice exits in buildings more than I used to. I do not panic or anything like that, but the memory is always there. It is strange how a place can be part of a happy memory and a horrible one at the same time. For me, that hotel is still tied to a romantic getaway with my boyfriend, a time when we finally got to relax together after a stressful period. But it is also tied to the fire, the couple who died, and the huge Christmas tree that went from being the most beautiful thing in the lobby to the thing that caused the tragedy. I still think about that trip often, especially around Christmas. I think about the small inn above the pub, the fireplace, and the owner's dog sleeping beside it. I think about how I had wished we were staying in the luxury hotel instead. And then I think about what happened 2 weeks later. And I feel a cold chill every time. Because we were so close to choosing that hotel. We were so close to being part of that same story in a different way. And even though we were safe, even though we left before anything happened, the memory still feels like a warning. Sometimes the places that look the safest and most beautiful can hide the worst dangers. Sometimes something as lovely as a Christmas tree can become something deadly. And sometimes you do not realize how lucky you were until days later, when the place you wished you had stayed in is gone. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I were lying in bed late at night. It was one of those quiet nights where everything in the house felt still, almost too still. There was no TV on, no music playing, no sound from outside, nothing except the tiny noises a house makes when everyone is supposed to be asleep. The walls would creak every now and then, the air would shift a little, and sometimes the floor would make a soft sound like it was settling. Nothing unusual, really, but when it is 3 in the morning and you are the only person awake, even normal sounds feel louder than they should. My girlfriend was already fast asleep beside me. She had fallen asleep earlier, curled up under the blanket, breathing softly like she was completely out. I, on the other hand, was still awake because I was playing my Game Boy. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous now, but at the time I was deep into Pokemon, and honestly, I was having a great time. There was something peaceful about lying there in the dark, playing an old game while the whole house slept around me. It felt simple, comfortable, and safe. The bedroom door was shut. That detail matters, because it meant there was no open view into the room from the hallway. We were alone in the house, and all the lights were off except for a small nightlight out in the hallway. The nightlight was close enough to our bedroom door that it cast a soft glow along the hallway floor. It was not bright, but it was bright enough that if something moved past the door, you could see a shadow against the light. The way my bed was positioned, I could see the bedroom door while lying on my back. I did not have to sit up or turn my head too much. If I looked past the screen of my Game Boy, I could see the door frame right there in front of me. The room itself was dark, but the edges of the door were faintly outlined by that weak light from the hallway. It was the kind of light that makes everything look a little strange. Not completely dark, not fully visible either. Just enough light to let your mind fill in the blanks. I was not scared at first. I had no reason to be. Like I said, I do not usually believe in scary stories or ghost stories. I have always been the kind of person who tries to find the normal explanation first. If I hear a sound at night, I assume it is the house settling. If something falls, I assume it was not placed right. If someone says they saw something strange, I usually think they were tired, half asleep, or imagining it. I am not the type to jump straight to ghosts. So that night, I was relaxed. My girlfriend was sleeping. I was playing Pokemon. The house was quiet. It was late, but nothing felt wrong. I was probably tired, but not sleepy enough to stop playing. I had that feeling where you know you should go to bed, but you keep telling yourself, just a few more minutes, a few more battles, a little more progress. Anyone who has played a game late at night knows exactly what I mean. At some point, I glanced up from the screen. I do not know why I looked up right then. Maybe my eyes needed a break from the game. Maybe I heard something small without realizing it. Maybe it was just random. But when I looked toward the bedroom door, I noticed something that made me pause. In the hallway, right outside our closed bedroom door, I saw what looked like the shadow of feet walking past. It was not a full body. I did not see a person standing there. I did not see a face or hands or anything like that. It was just the lower part, like feet or legs moving through the light from the nightlight. The shadow passed across the bottom area near the door frame, where the hallway light showed most clearly. It looked exactly like someone had walked by our bedroom door. For a second, I just stared. My brain did not understand what I had seen. The first thought was simple. Someone walked past the door. But then the rest of my brain caught up and reminded me that nobody else was in the house. It was just me and my girlfriend. She was asleep right next to me. The door was closed. The lights were off. There should not have been anybody in that hallway. I looked at the door, waiting to see if the shadow would come back. It did not. The hallway light stayed still. The door stayed shut. I listened carefully, but I did not hear footsteps. I did not hear anyone moving around. There was no sound of a door opening, no floorboards creaking under someone's weight, no whispering, no breathing, nothing, just the quiet house and the tiny sound of my Game Boy in my hands. I tried to tell myself I had imagined it. Maybe the light had flickered. Maybe my eyes were tired from staring at the screen. Maybe the game's glow had caused some weird reflection. Maybe I had moved my hand or the blanket, and the shadow had made it look like feet. I wanted that to be the answer, because it was the easiest one. It was late, I was tired, and my eyes were probably playing tricks on me. That explanation made sense. But I kept looking at the door. Something about it had felt too real. The movement had been too clean, too much like walking. It was not just a random flicker or a blur. It had the rhythm of steps. One foot, then the other, passing by the doorway. I know how that sounds, and I know it is easy to dismiss, but when you see something like that with your own eyes, it sticks in your head. Even if you try to laugh it off, part of you knows what it looked like. Then my girlfriend giggled in her sleep. It was sudden and soft, but because the room was so quiet, it made me jump a little. She was still asleep, or at least she seemed to be. Her eyes were closed, her body was relaxed, and she had not moved much. But she let out this little sleepy laugh, like someone had said something funny in a dream. That alone would have been weird timing, but not scary. People laugh in their sleep sometimes. People talk in their sleep. It happens. I have heard it before. But what she said right after that is what made the whole night feel wrong. Without opening her eyes, without sounding fully awake, she said, "Say hello to my grandmother." The second those words came out of her mouth, I froze. I looked down at her immediately. My heart felt like it dropped into my stomach. The Game Boy was still in my hands, but I forgot completely about the game. I did not care about Pokemon anymore. I did not care about anything except what I had just seen and what she had just said. I had just seen what looked like feet walking past our bedroom door. Then, only moments later, my sleeping girlfriend giggled and told me to say hello to her grandmother. I cannot explain how strange that felt in the moment. It was not like she woke up, looked at me, and made a joke. She was asleep. She had no reason to know I had just seen something. I had not said anything out loud. I had not moved much. I had not asked who was there. I had only looked at the door and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Then she said that. I freaked out. I leaned over and woke her up right away. I probably woke her up too fast because I was genuinely scared. She stirred and looked confused, the way people look when they are pulled out of deep sleep. I asked her what she had just said. She had no idea what I was talking about. I told her she had laughed and said, "Say hello to my grandmother." She looked at me like I was the one acting weird. I asked if she had been dreaming. She did not remember. She was still half asleep and annoyed because I had woken her up for what probably sounded like nonsense. I tried to explain what I had seen outside the door, but saying it out loud made it sound crazy. I told her I had looked up and seen the shadow of feet walking by the bedroom door. Then she laughed in her sleep and said the thing about her grandmother. She did not have an answer for me. How could she? She had been asleep. From her point of view, I had woken her up in the middle of the night, scared, talking about shadows and her grandmother. But from my point of view, the timing was too perfect to ignore. It was not just one strange thing. It was two strange things happening back to back, and they seemed connected in a way I did not like at all. I kept looking at the door. Even after she woke up, even while she was trying to understand what I was saying, my eyes kept going back to that door frame. I expected to see something move again. I expected the handle to turn. I expected another shadow to pass through the hallway light. But nothing happened. The door stayed closed. The hallway stayed quiet. The nightlight kept glowing like it had no idea what it had just shown me. At some point, I got out of bed to check the house. I did not want to, but I also could not just lie there wondering if someone was inside. Even if I did not believe in ghosts, there was still the possibility of a real person. That was almost worse. If I had seen feet outside the door, maybe someone had broken in. Maybe someone was walking around the hallway. Maybe the whole ghost idea was stupid, and the real danger was a person inside our house. So I checked. I opened the bedroom door carefully and looked out into the hallway. The nightlight was still on, casting that same weak glow. The hallway was empty. There was nobody standing there, nobody moving away, no shadow disappearing around a corner. I listened again. Nothing. The house felt still. I checked the nearby rooms, the doors, the usual places someone might hide or pass through. There was no one. Nothing was open. Nothing looked disturbed. That should have made me feel better, but it did not. In some ways, it made me feel worse. If I had found a window open or a door unlocked, I could have explained it. It would have been terrifying, but at least it would have been real in a way I understood. Instead, there was nothing. The house was exactly as it should have been, except for the fact that I knew I had seen something. I went back to bed, but I did not go back to feeling calm. My girlfriend was more awake by then, and I could tell she was starting to feel unsettled too, even if she had not seen it herself. It is hard to stay calm when someone beside you is clearly scared. She asked me again what I saw, and I told her as clearly as I could. I said it looked like feet, like someone walking past the door, only visible because of the nightlight in the hallway. Then I told her again what she had said. Say hello to my grandmother. I asked her if she had been thinking about her grandmother lately, or if there was some reason she would say that in her sleep. I do not remember her giving me any clear answer. Maybe she had no idea. Maybe it meant nothing to her. But to me, in that exact moment, it meant everything. I could not separate the words from the shadow. The two things were now linked in my mind. I am not saying I saw her grandmother. I am not even saying I saw a ghost. I still do not know what I saw. I only know that something moved across that doorway, and then my sleeping girlfriend said something that made it feel like someone had been there. For the rest of the night, I could not relax. I tried to keep playing my game for a little while, probably because I wanted to act normal, but there was no way I could focus. Every few seconds, I looked up at the door. The screen of the Game Boy no longer felt comforting. The quiet no longer felt peaceful. The whole room felt different, like the air had changed. It felt like we were no longer alone, even though every normal check said we were. My girlfriend eventually fell back asleep, or at least tried to. I stayed awake much longer. I kept staring at the door and the line of light around it. I kept watching the floor near the hallway. I kept waiting for the shadow of feet to pass by again. It never did. But that did not make me feel safe. Sometimes when something strange happens only once, it becomes even more disturbing because you never get a chance to understand it. It just happens, then disappears, leaving you with nothing but the memory. The next day, the whole thing felt slightly less intense in daylight, but it did not feel fake. That is the strange part about experiences like this. Morning tries to make everything normal again. Sunlight comes through the windows, the house looks ordinary, and you start telling yourself maybe you were just tired. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe you overreacted. But then you remember the exact timing, the words, and the way your body reacted before you had time to think, and the fear comes back. I thought about it a lot after that. I tried to break it down logically. The hallway nightlight could have made shadows if something moved in front of it. But what moved? There was no one in the house. A car passing outside might have changed the light, but the bedroom door was closed, and the shadow looked low, like feet near the floor, not a sweeping light from a window. Maybe I saw my own hands or blanket moving. But I was lying on my back, looking at the door, and the shadow was outside the room, in the hallway light. Then there was my girlfriend talking in her sleep. That could be explained on its own. People say strange things in dreams all the time. They can say names, sentences, random things that mean nothing. If she had said it at any other time, I might have laughed it off. But she said it right after I saw the shadow. Not an hour later. Not before. Right after. That is the part I cannot get past. I do not know much about what people believe when it comes to spirits or family members visiting. I have heard stories, of course. Everyone has. A loved one passes away, and someone claims they felt them nearby, saw them in a dream, or heard something strange. Like I said, I have always been skeptical about that kind of thing. I usually do not buy into it. I do not like scary stories that feel made up, and I do not go around looking for supernatural explanations. But that night got to me. It was not dramatic in the way horror movies are dramatic. There was no face at the window, no voice from the hallway, no figure standing at the foot of the bed. It was just a shadow that looked like feet walking by a door, and a sleeping person saying one sentence at the worst possible time. But that was enough. Sometimes the scariest things are small. Sometimes it is the quiet, simple details that stay with you because they feel too specific to ignore. I still remember how the room looked, the dark shape of the door, the thin glow of the nightlight coming from the hallway, my girlfriend asleep beside me, the small screen of the Game Boy lighting up my hands, the sudden movement by the door, then her little giggle, then those words, "Say hello to my grandmother." Even writing that now makes me feel strange. I never got an explanation. Nothing else happened that night after I checked the house. No one was there. No one had come in. No one had walked down the hallway that I could prove. My girlfriend did not remember saying anything. She did not remember a dream. The house was normal. Everything was normal, except for those few seconds. And maybe that is why it still bothers me. If something bigger had happened, maybe I could tell myself it was a nightmare or a full hallucination. If I had been half asleep, maybe I could dismiss it. But I was awake. I was playing a game. I looked up and saw something move. Then my girlfriend, still asleep, said something that matched the feeling of what I had seen. I still do not fully believe in ghost stories. I am still not the kind of person who hears a noise and assumes it is something paranormal. But I also cannot pretend that night did not scare me. It did. It scared me badly enough that I woke her up in a panic. It scared me badly enough that I checked the house. It scared me badly enough that I still remember it years later. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was tired eyes, a strange shadow, and sleep talking all happening at the same time. Maybe my brain connected two unrelated things because it was late and dark. That is possible. I can admit that. But I also know how it felt. It felt like someone had walked past our bedroom door at 3 in the morning. It felt like my girlfriend somehow knew, even in her sleep. And when she told me to say hello to her grandmother, it felt like for one brief moment there was someone else in that house with us. I did not see them clearly. I did not hear them. I never saw them again. But that night, I saw the shadow of their feet pass through the hallway light. I was 16 years old when it happened, and even though it was 10 years ago now, I can still see that night clearly in my mind. Some memories fade with time, and some become softer around the edges. But this one never did. It stayed sharp. It stayed heavy. It is the kind of memory that does not feel like a normal part of the past. It feels like something that is still sitting somewhere inside me, waiting to come back whenever the house is quiet, or whenever I hear a strange sound at night. At that age, I was already used to things in my house not being normal. I do not say that lightly. Some people grow up in homes where parents argue sometimes, or where life gets stressful here and there. My home was different. My parents were alcoholics, and because of that, there was always this feeling that anything could happen. Some nights were quiet, but not peaceful. Other nights were loud, messy, and full of tension. Even when nothing bad was happening, I never really felt safe in the way a kid is supposed to feel safe at home. I learned early to listen to sounds in the house. I could tell the difference between a normal bump and something serious. I could tell when my dad's voice was getting worse, when my mom was too drunk to stand straight, or when things were about to become a problem. I knew the sound of stumbling footsteps. I knew the sound of bottles being moved around. I knew the sound of angry, slurred words coming from downstairs when I was trying to sleep. I should not have known those things at 16, but I did. That night started like many other nights. I had gone to bed, probably hoping that everyone would just pass out and the house would stay quiet until morning. My little sister was in her room, and I was in mine. I do not remember what time I fell asleep. I only remember waking up suddenly because of a noise. It was not a small sound like the house settling or something falling off a table. It was enough to pull me out of sleep fast, the kind of sound that makes your body react before your mind understands what is happening. For a few seconds, I just lay there in the dark, listening. My room was quiet, but downstairs there was something wrong about the silence that followed. That was the part that made me nervous. In my house, when something fell or someone yelled, there was usually more noise afterward. Someone would complain, curse, stumble around, or slam something. But after that sound, there was a strange pause. It felt like the house was holding its breath. I sat up in bed and listened harder. I do not remember if I called out at first or if I stayed quiet. I just remember that cold feeling starting in my chest. It was the feeling I got when I knew I had to check on something, but did not want to. Part of me wanted to stay in my room and pretend I had not heard anything. Another part of me knew that if I did not go downstairs, I would lie there all night, imagining the worst. So I got out of bed. The house was dark as I stepped into the hallway. At 16, I should have been thinking about school, friends, music, or whatever normal teenagers think about. Instead, I was walking through my own house like I was about to enter a crime scene. I moved slowly, trying to hear anything from downstairs. I expected to hear my mom crying, or my dad yelling, or someone moving around, but I heard almost nothing. As I reached the stairs, the fear got stronger. There is something awful about going downstairs in the dark when you already know something is wrong. Every step feels too loud. Every shadow looks strange. The lower part of the house was dim, and I could not fully see what was waiting for me at first. I remember holding on to the railing and looking down, trying to understand the shapes below before I reached the bottom. Then, I saw them. My mom was lying on the floor. There was blood around her head. My dad was lying next to her. Neither of them was moving. For a moment, everything inside me stopped. I do not mean I was simply scared. I mean, I completely froze. My body would not move, and my mind could not form a clear thought. I stood there on the stairs, or near the bottom of them, staring at my parents lying on the floor, and all I could think was that they were dead. The blood was what made it feel real. I had seen my parents drunk before. I had seen them passed out before. I had seen them in terrible states before. But this was different. My mom was on the floor with a pool of blood around her head, and my dad was beside her, not moving either. It looked like something horrible had happened. It looked like the end of something. It looked like one of those scenes you are never supposed to see in your own home. My first thought was that my dad had finally lost it. That was not a random thought. In a house like mine, when alcohol was involved and tempers were high, fear always had a direction. I had spent years worrying about what could happen if things went too far. So when I saw my mom bleeding on the floor and my dad lying beside her, my mind went to the worst possible explanation. I thought maybe he had killed her. Then I thought maybe he had killed himself too. I did not know what else to think. They were both on the floor, neither of them was moving, and there was blood. I wish I could say I ran to them right away, but I did not. I froze. I stood there and stared. I was 16, and in that moment I felt much younger. I felt like a child standing at the edge of something too big and too terrible to understand. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel it in my throat. My hands felt weak. My legs felt locked in place. I knew I needed to do something. But for a few seconds, maybe longer, I could not make myself move. It is strange how the brain works in moments like that. Time seems to stretch out. You notice little things that do not matter. The angle of a body, the way the light falls on the floor, the smell in the air, the dark shine of blood, the quiet, especially the quiet. I kept waiting for one of them to move, to groan, to say something, anything that would prove they were alive. But they just lay there. Eventually, I forced myself to move. It took effort, like I had to push through an invisible wall. I remember being terrified to get closer, because getting closer meant I would know for sure. From a distance, there was still a terrible uncertainty. Maybe they were alive, maybe they were dead. But once I touched them, once I checked, I would have an answer. And I was not ready for that answer. Still, I knew I had to do it. I went over to them carefully. I did not want to step in the blood. I did not want to touch it. I did not want any of this to be happening. But I got close enough to check. I remember leaning down and trying to see if my mom was breathing. I was shaking. I had seen people check for vitals on TV, but it is different when it is your own mother on the floor and you are a teenager trying not to fall apart. I did not feel trained or brave. I just felt scared. Then I realized she was alive. My dad was alive too. That should have brought relief, and in some way it did, but it did not make the scene any less horrifying. They were not dead, but my mom was hurt badly. She had fallen face first onto the hard floor and broken her nose. There was blood because of that. The reason my dad was lying next to her was not because he had hurt himself. He had just decided to lie down, too. They had both gotten way too drunk again, and everything had turned into a nightmare. I cannot explain the mix of emotions I felt when I realized what had actually happened. Relief, anger, fear, disgust, sadness, all of it hit me at once. I was glad they were alive, but I was also furious in a way I did not know how to express. Because this was not just some accident in a normal home. This was another result of their drinking. Another night where I had to become the adult because the adults in the house could not take care of themselves. My mom needed help. That much was clear. There was too much blood, and I did not know how serious her injury was. My dad was not useful. He was drunk, angry, and not thinking clearly. Instead of helping me, he made everything harder. I remember him yelling at me while I was trying to handle the situation. I was trying to check on my mom, trying to understand how badly she was hurt, trying to think about my little sister upstairs, and he was yelling like I was the problem. That is one of the things that still hurts when I think about it. I was a kid. I was 16. I had just walked downstairs thinking I had found my parents dead. I had just forced myself to check if they were breathing. I had blood on the floor in front of me and my little sister upstairs, and instead of having someone comfort me or tell me what to do, I had to deal with my dad yelling. There was no space for me to be scared. There was no space for me to break down. I had to act. My little sister was one of my first thoughts after that. I did not want her to come downstairs and see what I had seen. I did not want her to look at our mom on the floor with blood around her head. I did not want her to see our dad like that. I knew that image would stay with her the way it stayed with me. So I had to keep her away. I remember locking her in her room or making sure she stayed there, not because I wanted to scare her, but because I was trying to keep her safe from the scene downstairs and from the chaos around our dad. That is a horrible position for a teenager to be in. I was not just thinking about calling for help. I was thinking like a parent. I was thinking about protecting a younger child from trauma. I was thinking about keeping her away from blood and yelling and drunk adults. I was trying to manage a whole emergency in a house where the actual adults had created the emergency. I called 911 for my mom. Making that call felt unreal. I had to explain what happened as clearly as I could, even though I barely understood it myself. I had to say my mom was bleeding, that she had fallen, that she needed help. I had to stay calm enough for the person on the phone. I remember feeling like my voice did not belong to me. Part of me was still stuck on the stairs, staring at them for the first time. Another part of me was trying to speak like someone responsible, someone who knew what they were doing. While waiting for help, the house felt like a disaster. My mom was hurt. My dad was yelling. My sister had to be kept away. There was blood on the floor. I had to think about what the paramedics would need, whether the door was unlocked, whether my mom was still breathing normally, whether my dad would get in the way. Every second felt heavy. Every small task felt too big. At some point, I had to clean up the blood. I do not remember if it was before or after help came, or if some of it happened later. What I remember is being there with blood on the ground, trying to wipe it away. That part felt especially wrong. Cleaning up your own mother's blood while your father yells at you is not something any kid should have to do. It is the kind of thing that changes how you see your home. A floor is not just a floor after that. A hallway is not just a hallway. The place where it happened becomes marked in your mind even after it is physically clean. The blood came up. Eventually, floors can be cleaned. People can say it was just an accident. They can say everyone was drunk, someone fell, things got out of hand. They can move on. But I did not move on in the same way. I could not erase the moment I saw them from the stairs. I could not erase the instant when I thought my mother was dead. I could not erase the feeling of looking at my father beside her and thinking he had finally done something that could not be undone. The truth was less dramatic than murder, but it was still horrifying. They had gotten way too drunk again. My mom had fallen face first into the hard floor and broken her nose. My dad, in his drunken state, had simply laid down next to her instead of properly helping. That was the explanation. That was the reality. But knowing the explanation did not make the image less frightening. It did not make my fear less real. It did not make me less 16. For a long time after that night, I had trouble with sudden noises while sleeping. If I heard something from another room, my body reacted before I could think. I would wake up with my heart racing, already imagining something terrible. That is what living in that kind of house does to you. It trains your body to expect emergencies. It teaches you that a noise in the night might mean you have to get up and become responsible for everyone. I also thought a lot about how quickly childhood can disappear in moments like that. One minute, you are a teenager in bed. The next minute, you are checking your parents for signs of life. You are calling emergency services. You are protecting a younger sibling. You are cleaning blood. You are being yelled at by someone who should be helping you. And then, somehow, you are expected to keep going afterward like it was just another bad night. I do not remember every detail of what happened after the ambulance came or how the rest of the night ended. Some parts are blurry. Trauma does that. It keeps certain images in perfect focus and lets other parts disappear. I remember the blood. I remember the stillness of their bodies. I remember the fear that my dad had killed my mom and himself. I remember forcing myself to get close enough to check if they were breathing. I remember my little sister and the need to keep her away. I remember calling 911. I remember cleaning. I remember my dad yelling. Those are the pieces that stayed. 10 years have passed since then, but I can still feel that moment if I let myself think about it too long. I can still picture walking down the stairs and seeing them on the floor. I can still feel that frozen second where my mind decided they were dead. I can still remember how hard it was to move toward them. That kind of fear does not leave just because time passes. It becomes quieter, maybe, but it does not vanish. People talk about scary experiences like they have to involve ghosts, monsters, or strangers outside the window. But some of the scariest things happen inside your own home, with people you know. Sometimes the horror is not supernatural. Sometimes it is a parent on the floor in a pool of blood. Sometimes it is a drunk father lying beside her and yelling while you try to save the situation. Sometimes it is realizing that no adult is coming to protect you, because the adults are the reason you are scared. That night taught me something I wish I had never learned. It taught me how quickly fear can take over your body. It taught me what blood looks like when you are not expecting it. It taught me how heavy responsibility can feel when it falls on a kid. It taught me that a home can be dangerous even when the doors are locked and everyone inside is family. I still do not like thinking about it, but I know I will never forget it. The memory is too clear. The sound that woke me up, the dark stairs, the sight of my mom on the floor, the blood around her head, my dad lying next to her, the silence before I knew they were alive, the courage it took to check. And even though it turned out not to be what I first feared, that first moment was real to me. For those few seconds, I believed I had just walked in on the worst thing imaginable. That feeling has stayed with me for 10 years. Looking back now, this story does not scare me the same way it did when it happened. At the time, it terrified me. Now, after many years, and after knowing that I survived, I can see it in a softer way. It still gives me chills, but not only because it felt paranormal. It gives me chills because of how strange, personal, and almost comforting it was. It is the only experience in my life that I would truly call paranormal. And even now, I do not have a normal explanation that satisfies me. When I was 19, I got extremely sick. I was away at college at the time, living far from home and trying to act like an adult even though I was still very young in many ways. My mom lived about 4 hours away, so when things started going wrong with my health, she was not right there with me. I did have friends, but being sick away from home has a way of making you feel alone very quickly. You suddenly realize how much you still want your family when your body starts failing you. It started as pain and discomfort, but it became much worse fast. I ended up being admitted to the hospital with a severe kidney infection. It was not a small infection or something I could have ignored for another day. My fever was dangerously high enough that it could have killed me if I had not gotten treatment. I did not fully understand how serious it was at first, because when you are that sick, everything becomes blurry. You know you feel awful, but you do not always realize how close things are to becoming life-threatening. My body was under so much stress that my heart rate and blood pressure were completely out of control. When the hospital staff first examined me, they were worried that I might have had a heart attack. That was how bad my numbers looked. I was only 19, so hearing anything like that was frightening in a way I cannot fully describe. I had gone from feeling sick to suddenly being treated like something major was happening inside my body. People were checking me, asking questions, moving around me, and trying to figure out what was wrong. I remember feeling weak, hot, and out of it. My fever made everything feel strange. The lights in the hospital seemed too bright. Sounds felt too sharp and too far away at the same time. My body felt heavy, but my mind would not settle. I was exhausted, but I could not really rest. Anyone who has had a dangerously high fever knows that it can make the world feel unreal. You are awake, but everything has a dreamlike edge to it. You feel trapped inside your own body while it burns. After I was admitted, they gave me a room, but it felt like it took forever for a doctor to come see me. I know hospitals are busy, and I know emergencies happen, but at the time, every minute felt much longer than it was. I was lying there, sick, scared, and waiting for someone to tell me exactly what was going on. I had already been through enough tests and checks to know something was seriously wrong, but I still did not have the kind of clear answer that makes you feel safe. A friend had driven me to the hospital, and she stayed with me for company. I was very grateful for that. She sat near me and kept me from being completely alone. I do not remember every detail of what we talked about, because I was so sick that much of that day is foggy. I think she had a textbook or something with her, maybe because she was trying to keep herself busy during the long wait. She was there, physically in the room with me, but I still felt alone in that strange hospital way. There is something about lying in a hospital bed that makes you feel separate from everyone else, even when someone is sitting nearby. The room was ordinary. There was nothing creepy about it in the usual sense. It had the normal hospital smell, that sharp, clean smell mixed with something cold and metallic. There were machines, plain walls, the bed, the blankets, and the kind of quiet that is never really quiet because hospitals always have sounds in the background, footsteps in the hall, wheels rolling, distant voices, beeps, doors opening and closing, nurses passing by. It was not a haunted-looking place. It was just a hospital room. I was lying in bed, waiting, when I suddenly saw her. At the foot of my bed stood my nanny. She had been dead for about 15 years by then. I was 19, so she had passed away when I was still very young. But I remembered her. I remembered the feeling of her, the way she looked, the way she dressed, and the warmth she had in my family's memory. And there she was, standing at the foot of my hospital bed, like she had simply walked into the room to check on me. She did not look like a ghost in the way movies show ghosts. She was not transparent. I could not see through her. She was not floating or glowing. She looked completely solid. as real and present as my friend sitting in the room with me. That was one of the strangest parts. If she had looked misty or dreamlike, maybe my mind would have dismissed it faster. But she looked like a real person standing there. She looked like she belonged in the room. She was wearing one of her signature mumos, the kind of clothing I remembered her for. That detail is important to me because it felt so specific. It was not just some random old woman shape that my sick brain turned into my grandmother. It was her. The clothes, the presence, the way she stood, all of it felt familiar. She was smiling at me. Not in a dramatic way, not in a frightening way, just smiling. It was a calm, loving smile. The kind you would expect from a grandmother watching over someone she loves. But I was terrified. I know that might sound strange because she looked peaceful, and she was someone I loved. But in that moment, I was very sick, and I had heard too many stories about people seeing dead loved ones when they were close to death. I had heard those stories where someone is dying, and they see a parent, grandparent, spouse, or someone they loved who had already passed away. People say those loved ones come to help them cross over, to guide them to the other side. Whether those stories are true or not, they were all I could think about when I saw her. My first thought was not, how sweet, my Nani is here. My first thought was, oh no, am I dying? That fear hit me harder than anything else that had happened that day. I already knew I was dangerously sick. I already knew my fever was bad and my heart rate and blood pressure had scared the hospital staff. So when my dead grandmother appeared at the foot of my bed, my mind went straight to the worst possible meaning. It felt like confirmation that my body was closer to giving out than anyone had told me. I stared at her. I do not know how long she was there. It might have been only a few seconds, but in memory it feels longer. She just stood there, smiling gently, as if she was trying to tell me something without speaking. I did not hear a voice. She did not move toward me. She did not reach out. She did not say my name. She simply appeared, looked at me with that calm smile, and then, just as suddenly as she had come, she was gone. She disappeared. 1 second, she was there, solid and clear, and then she was not. I was shaken. I turned to my friend and asked if she had seen anything. She said no. She had been looking down at a textbook or something at the time, so she had not been watching the foot of my bed. That answer did not help me much. Part of me wanted her to say yes, because then I would know it had not only been in my head. Another part of me was scared of what it would mean if she had seen her too. Because she did not see anything, the easiest explanation was that I had hallucinated. And I understand that. I was incredibly ill. My fever was dangerously high. My body was under extreme stress. People hallucinate when they are that sick. I know that is possible. Every time I tell this story, there is usually someone who says, of course it was a hallucination. You had a high fever. And I get why they say that. I really do. From the outside, that sounds like the most logical answer. But the story did not end there. If all that happened was that I saw my dead grandmother while I was sick, maybe I could have accepted the fever explanation more easily. I might still have wondered about it, but I could have placed it in that category of strange things the brain does when the body is under pressure. But what happened later made it much harder for me to brush off. After I saw Noni, I was still stuck, waiting. The doctor still had not come in right away. I had already been in that room for hours, somewhere around 8 to 10 hours, waiting through the long hospital process. Anyone who has been admitted knows how endless that can feel. Nurses come and go, tests happen, time passes, and you still feel like you are waiting for the main person to come in and tell you the plan. Finally, the doctor who was going to be the lead on my case came into the room to introduce himself, and I almost could not believe what I was seeing. This man looked exactly like my papi. My papi was Nani's husband. He was also deceased. He had been gone too, and yet this doctor standing in front of me looked so much like him that it felt unreal. I do not mean he had a slight resemblance or maybe the same general features. I mean he looked like he could have been his twin. His face, his build, the way he appeared when he entered the room, everything about him struck me immediately. It was so strange that I did not know how to react. I had just seen my dead Nani within the hour, standing at the foot of my bed while I was terribly sick. Then, the doctor assigned to care for me walked in looking exactly like her dead husband. That was not just a random coincidence to me in that moment. It felt connected. It felt like something had been arranged, like there was a message hidden in the timing. I did not know what to say. I was still sick, still weak, and now I was looking at a doctor whose face reminded me so strongly of my grandfather that it made the whole room feel strange again. I listened to him, but part of my mind was somewhere else, trying to understand how this could be happening. I wondered if I was still hallucinating. I wondered if my fever was making me see my papi in the doctor's face. I wondered if I was so sick and scared that my mind was turning strangers into family. But later, my mom came to see me. Like I said, she lived about 4 hours away, and I was away at college, so she had to drive to get there. When she arrived and eventually met my doctor, her reaction told me everything. She did not know what to say at first. She was stunned. She looked at him and was completely flabbergasted because he looked so much like her dead father. This was not just me seeing things because I was sick. My mom saw it too. She had known her father far better than I had, and she was just as shocked by the resemblance. That was the moment the whole thing became even harder to explain away. Yes, I could have hallucinated seeing Nani because of my fever. Yes, maybe the doctor looking like my papi was a strange coincidence. Life is full of coincidences. People sometimes look like other people. Hospitals are full of strangers, and every now and then someone will remind you strongly of someone you knew. I understand all of that. I know the skeptical explanation, and I know it makes sense to some people. But deep down, I do not think that is all it was. I like to believe something more loving was happening. I like to imagine that my deceased loved ones saw what was going on. Maybe they knew I was scared. Maybe they knew I was dangerously ill. Maybe they knew I was away from home, waiting in a hospital room, feeling alone and unsure if I was going to be okay. And maybe, in whatever way things work after death, they noticed that the doctor who would be taking care of me looked just like my papi. So maybe they had a little conversation somewhere beyond us. Maybe they said, "Look, her doctor looks just like papi. That is going to mean something to her. But she might be scared. She might not understand. Let's send Nani first. Let's show her that she is not alone. Let's show her that everything is going to be all right." That is what I choose to believe. At the time, it scared me because I thought seeing Nani meant I might be dying. But now, because I did not die, I see it differently. I do not think she came to take me away. I think she came to comfort me. I think she came to let me know I was being watched over. Maybe she came because she knew the doctor who looked like Papi was coming next, and she wanted me to understand that this was a sign, not a warning. The whole experience changed the way I think about love and death. I am not saying I have all the answers. I do not know what happens after people die. I do not know how much of what we experience in sickness is spiritual and how much is the brain trying to survive. I know there are logical explanations for parts of my story. I know high fevers can cause hallucinations. I know strangers can look like people we have lost. I know memory can add emotion to moments after the fact. But I also know what I saw. I saw my Noni standing at the foot of my hospital bed, looking as solid as anyone else in the room, wearing one of her familiar mumos and smiling at me. I saw her during one of the sickest and scariest moments of my life. Then, not long after, the doctor assigned to my case walked in, looking exactly like her husband, my papi. And when my mom saw him too, she reacted the same way I did. She saw the resemblance. She was stunned by it. That is too much for me to dismiss completely. Maybe some people will always call it a hallucination and a coincidence. That is fine. They can believe that. I understand why they would. But for me, the story feels bigger than that. It feels like one of those rare moments where the world opens just slightly, just enough to let you feel that love does not end as cleanly as we think it does. I was 19, terribly sick, far from home, and scared. I did not know if I was going to be okay. I was lying in a hospital bed waiting for a doctor, with my body burning from infection and my heart acting like something was seriously wrong. And then my grandmother appeared. She did not speak, but she smiled. She did not stay, but she came. And somehow that was enough. Now, years later, I no longer remember the exact pain of the infection as clearly. I remember being sick, of course, but the physical part has faded. What stayed with me most was that moment at the foot of the bed. The sight of her, the fear, the confusion. Then the doctor. Then my mom's shocked face when she saw him too. It is not a terrifying story to me anymore. It is strange, yes. It is unsettling, yes. But more than that, it feels sweet. It feels like a reminder that maybe the people who love us do not fully leave. Maybe they are still close in ways we cannot understand. Maybe they show up when we need them most, even if only for a few seconds. I did not die that day. I got treatment. I recovered. I went on with my life. But I never forgot what happened in that hospital room. My dead grandmother appeared to me when I was the sickest I had ever been. Soon after, my doctor walked in looking exactly like her dead husband. Maybe that was nothing more than fever and coincidence. But I do not believe it was. I believe Nani came to tell me I was going to be all right. I was almost murdered when I was in high school. That sounds dramatic when I say it now, and for a long time I hated saying it out loud because it made the whole thing feel too real. But there is no softer way to describe what happened. I was a senior in high school, living at a boarding school, and I found out that someone I knew had my name on a kill list. Not only that, but he had things in his room that made it clear the list was not some stupid joke or angry note. He had a hunting knife. He had rope. And my name was written there with the others. Even now, years later, I still think about how close I might have come to not making it out of that school alive. The boarding school itself did not seem dangerous at first. It was the kind of place where students lived on campus, went to classes, ate in the dining hall, studied in assigned rooms, and walked back to their dorms afterward. There were rules, schedules, staff members, and enough structure to make it feel like everyone was being watched over. You assume a place like that is safe because there are adults around. You assume the people around you are just other students dealing with classes, homework, friendships, and all the normal stress of being a teenager. You do not expect one of them to be hiding something that dark. There was a guy at the school who seemed nice to everyone. That was part of what made it so disturbing later. He was not the person everyone avoided. He was not openly cruel, strange, or threatening in the way people might imagine someone like that would be. He came across as friendly. He talked to people. He smiled. He acted helpful. A lot of people thought he was just a good guy. I did not have any reason at first to think he was dangerous. He and I had study hall together. Since this was a boarding school, study hall was part of the routine. We would sit there doing homework, reading, or pretending to study while waiting for the evening to end. After study hall, students would head back to their dorms. Sometimes people walked in groups, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. The campus could feel quiet at night, especially when the day's noise had settled and everyone was supposed to be getting ready for bed. This guy often offered to walk me and my friend back to our dorm. At the time, it seemed harmless, maybe even polite. There was nothing strange about it at first. He was nice to us, and when someone is consistently nice, you do not immediately question every small gesture. He was just the guy who offered to walk us back. I did not think he had any hidden plan. I did not think he was building up to anything. I definitely did not think he was the kind of person who might someday come after me. Looking back, I wonder if there were signs I missed. Maybe there were little moments where he paid too much attention, or where his kindness felt a little too intense. Maybe my mind has tried to find warning signs because it wants the story to make sense. But at the time, I was a teenager. I was trying to get through my senior year. I had classes, friends, and my own life to think about. I did not spend every day looking for danger in people who smiled at me. Then one night, everything changed. After study hall, he offered again to walk me back. I do not remember every detail of that night, but I remember the feeling when things shifted. It was like one moment we were in a normal situation, and the next moment I realized I was not safe. He made a move on me. It was not something I wanted. It was not something I had invited. It caught me off guard, and I pushed him away. I told him I had a boyfriend. I thought that would be enough. I thought that if I made it clear I was not interested, he would stop. Maybe he would be embarrassed. Maybe he would be upset for a minute. Maybe things would be awkward after that. But I thought the situation would end there. That is what you hope when someone crosses a line. You hope they will accept no, even if they do not like hearing it. He did not accept it. He flipped out. The change in him was immediate and frightening. The nice, friendly version of him disappeared so fast, it felt like watching a mask fall off. He started screaming and cussing at me. His anger did not feel normal. It was not just disappointment. It was rage. It was the kind of rage that makes your body understand danger before your mind has time to explain it. He was furious that I had rejected him, like I had done something wrong by saying no. I remember feeling trapped in that moment. I had not expected him to react that way. And, for a few seconds, I had to decide what to do quickly. He was bigger than me, angrier than me, and completely out of control. I did not know if he was going to grab me, hit me, or worse. All I knew was that I needed to get away from him. So, I kicked him. I kicked him hard, right between the legs, and then I ran. I did not wait to see how badly it hurt him. I did not stop to argue. I did not try to explain myself again. I just ran inside the dorm as fast as I could. I remember the fear in my body more than anything else. My heart was pounding. My legs felt weak and fast at the same time. I wanted to get behind a door, around other people, anywhere he could not reach me. The dorm felt like safety because there were walls, other students, and rules. Once I got inside, I thought maybe it was over. But it was not over. The next day, I was still shaken. I knew what had happened was bad, but part of me still hoped it would stop there. Maybe he would be embarrassed. Maybe he would stay away from me. Maybe the school would handle it if I told someone. I do not remember exactly what I expected, but I did not expect him to come after me again so soon. I did not understand yet how dangerous he really was. That next night at study hall, he came after me. I do not mean he gave me a dirty look or said something mean. I mean he came after me in a way that made it clear he wanted to hurt me. The fear from the night before came back instantly, but stronger. This time there was no confusion about whether I was overreacting. I knew I was in danger. I knew I had to move. I ran. I found a room and rushed inside. I do not know if it was the nearest room or just the first place I could get into, but I needed a door between us. Once I was inside, I hid in the closet. It sounds simple when I write it, but in the moment it was pure panic. My body was shaking, my thoughts were racing, and everything inside me was focused on staying alive. There were scissors in the room, and I grabbed them. I held them like a weapon because it was the only thing I had. I was a teenage girl hiding in a closet from someone who had already shown me he could turn violent when rejected. I did not know what he would do if he got through the door. I did not know if he would find me. I only knew that if he opened that closet, I needed something in my hand. So I stood there in the dark closet, holding a pair of scissors, listening to him pound on the door. That sound is something I will never forget. The pounding was loud and aggressive, and every hit made me feel like the door might give way. I could hear him outside, furious, trying to get in. I do not remember every word he said, if he was yelling words at all, because my fear was too loud in my own head. I just remember the force of him being on the other side of that door and knowing that if he got in, I might not be able to stop him. I tried to stay quiet. I tried to breathe without making noise. My hand was wrapped around the scissors so tightly that it hurt. I remember thinking about where I would have to aim if he came in. That is a horrible thought to have at any age, but especially in high school. You should not be standing in a closet at boarding school planning how to defend yourself with scissors against someone who wants to hurt you. Time felt strange while I was hiding. It could have been minutes, but it felt much longer. Every second stretched out. I kept waiting for the door to open. I kept waiting for him to find another way in. I kept waiting for the worst thing to happen. Fear can make your mind show you every possible ending at once. I pictured him getting inside. I pictured myself not being strong enough. I pictured people finding me too late. I had no idea that later the school would find things in his room that proved my fear was not an overreaction at all. At some point, other guys came and pulled him away. It took 3 of them to stop him. That detail still matters to me because it shows how out of control he was. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a minor argument. It took 3 guys to physically pull him away from the door so I could get out. If they had not been there, if they had been slower, if no one had heard what was happening, I do not know what would have happened to me. Once they dragged him away, they took him to the dean. I was finally able to escape the room, but I did not feel safe in a normal way. My body was still in survival mode. I had been hiding with scissors, waiting to see if I would have to fight for my life. You do not just walk away from that and feel fine. Even when the danger is removed, your body keeps shaking. Your mind keeps replaying it. You keep thinking about how close the door was to being opened, how close he was to getting to you. I wish I could say the adults immediately understood the full seriousness of it, but I do not remember feeling protected right away. At schools, especially boarding schools, there can be this strange pressure to keep things controlled, to treat dangerous behavior like a discipline issue instead of what it really is. But whatever they thought at first, the truth became impossible to ignore the next day. They searched his room. What they found still haunts me. In his room, they found a hunting knife. They found rope. And they found a kill list. My name was on it. When I learned that, something inside me went cold. It is one thing to know someone was angry at you. It is one thing to know someone chased you or tried to get into a room where you were hiding. That is already terrifying. But it is another thing entirely to find out that your name was written on a list and that he had a knife and rope in his room. Those things changed the whole meaning of what had happened. Suddenly, it was not just a violent outburst. It was not just rejection making him angry for one night. It looked planned. It looked like he had thought about hurting people. Maybe he had thought about hurting me before that night. Maybe when he offered to walk me and my friend back to the dorm, he was not just being nice. Maybe he had been watching, waiting, building up something in his head that I could not see. That thought still makes me sick. I keep thinking about all the times he walked with us before. All the times he smiled, acted friendly, and seemed normal. I think about how close I might have been to danger without knowing it. I think about how I trusted the situation because he was nice to everyone. That is one of the hardest parts to accept. Dangerous people do not always look dangerous. Sometimes they are polite. Sometimes they are helpful. Sometimes they blend in so well that when the truth comes out, everyone is shocked. I was shocked too, but I also was not. By then, I had seen the rage in him. I had seen how quickly he changed when I rejected him. I had heard him pounding on the door while I hid in a closet with scissors. Part of me already knew he was capable of something terrible. But seeing proof of it, knowing there was a list, knowing my name was there, made it real in a way I was not ready for. For a long time, I wondered what would have happened if I had not kicked him and run that first night. What if I had frozen? What if I had tried to calm him down instead of getting away? What if I had been alone somewhere farther from the dorm? What if I had not made it into that room the next night? What if those three guys had not been able to pull him away? These questions do not have answers, but they still come back sometimes. People say not to think that way, but it is hard not to. When you survive something like that, your mind tries to measure the distance between life and death. It looks for all the small moments that saved you. A locked door, a pair of scissors, someone hearing the noise, 3 people being strong enough to drag him away, the dean being involved, the room search happening before anything worse could happen. So many things had to go right for me to be safe. I also think about the other names on that list. I do not know what his plans were or how far he would have gone, but the fact that there was more than one name is horrifying. It means I was not the only person in danger. It means whatever was going on inside his mind was bigger than one rejection or one moment of anger. There was something deeply wrong there, something hidden behind the nice face everyone thought they knew. The experience changed the way I see people. I do not like admitting that, because I do not want to live with fear controlling everything. But it did change me. After that, I became more aware of how people react to being told no. I paid attention to anger in a way I had not before. I learned that someone can seem kind until they do not get what they want. I learned that a friendly reputation does not always mean a person is safe. It also changed how I felt about being trapped. To this day, I do not like being in rooms where I do not know the exits. I do not like feeling cornered. If someone is angry nearby, my body reacts before I can calm myself down. Loud pounding on doors still affects me. Even if I know it is harmless, some part of me goes back to that closet, to the scissors in my hand, to the sound of him trying to get in. The worst part is that for some people, it might sound like just a high school story. A guy liked me. I rejected him. He got angry, and then he got in trouble. But that is not what it was. He had a hunting knife. He had rope. He had a kill list with my name on it. That is not teenage drama. That is not a bad breakup or a misunderstanding. That is the kind of thing that makes you realize you were closer to becoming a news story than you ever wanted to be. I think about the version of myself from that night, hiding in the closet. I wish I could go back and tell her that she was right to be scared. I wish I could tell her that she was not overreacting. I wish I could tell her that grabbing the scissors and staying hidden was not silly or dramatic. It was survival. She did what she had to do. I also wish someone had protected her sooner. No student should have to learn that lesson at school. No one should have to find out that the person offering to walk them back to their dorm has a list with their name on it. Boarding school was supposed to be a place with rules, staff, and safety. But for me, it became the place where I learned that danger can sit next to you in study hall, smile at you, and wait for the right moment. I still do not know what he would have done if he had gotten to me. I do not know if the knife and rope were meant for me that night or later. I do not know how serious he was or how much time he had spent thinking about it. But I know enough. I know he came after me. I know he tried to get through the door. I know it took 3 guys to pull him away. I know what they found in his room the next day. And I know my name was on that list. That is the part that stays with me most. My name, written down by someone who had already shown he wanted to hurt me. There is something deeply chilling about knowing someone thought about you that way. Not as a person, not as a classmate, not as someone with a life, a family, and a future. Just a name on a list. I survived because I ran. I survived because I fought back. I survived because other people got there in time. I survived because the truth was found before he could do whatever he had been planning. But surviving does not mean forgetting. Even now, years later, the memory still follows me. I can still hear the pounding on that door. I can still feel the scissors in my hand. I can still feel the fear of standing in that closet, waiting to see if he would break in. And I can still remember the moment I found out that what I feared was not just in my head. He had a plan, and my name was on it. This story did not happen to me. It happened to my mom, and honestly, that makes it even harder for me to ignore. If it had happened to a stranger online, I might have read it, felt creeped out for a few minutes, and then moved on. If it had happened to someone I barely knew, I might have wondered if they were exaggerating or trying to make the story sound better than it really was. But this was my mom. I know her. I know how she talks when she is scared. I know how she sounds when she is making a joke, when she is annoyed, when she is serious, and when something has truly shaken her. And when she called me that day, she sounded genuinely terrified. This happened about a month or 2 ago. It was not late at night in some dark forest, and it was not in an abandoned building or some creepy place where you would already expect to feel uneasy. It happened during a normal day while she was sitting in her car. That is one of the details that bothers me. It was such an ordinary situation. She was not out looking for something strange. She was not trying to scare herself. She was not exploring some haunted place or telling ghost stories with friends. She was just sitting in her car, minding her own business, doing something on her phone. She had parked across from a field. I do not know every small detail of the place, but from what she told me, it was open enough that she had a clear view in front of her. There was a field across from where she sat, and at first, nothing about it seemed unusual. It was just a field, the kind of place most people would barely pay attention to if they were waiting in their car. You might glance up from your phone now and then, look at the grass or the trees or whatever is out there, and then go back to what you were doing. That was what my mom was doing. She was sitting there, looking at her phone, probably scrolling or texting or checking something like anyone else would. Then she noticed something out in the field. At first, she thought it was a bush. That is how she described it to me. She said it looked like a weird bush, something brownish red in color. Not green like a normal bush, not shaped quite the way it should have been, but close enough that her brain first tried to explain it that way. She said it did not look right. That was the part she kept repeating. It was not that she immediately thought she was looking at a creature or a monster or anything like that. Her first reaction was more confused than scared. It was just this strange shape in the field, this brownish red thing that looked like it could be a bush, but also looked wrong in a way she could not explain. It bothered her enough that she noticed it, but not enough at first to panic. Sometimes you see something from the corner of your eye, and your brain tries to label it quickly. A bag becomes an animal. A tree stump becomes a person. A shadow becomes something moving. Most of the time, when you look again, the normal answer appears and you feel silly for being startled. I think that is what she expected to happen. She looked at it, thought it was strange, and then looked back down at her phone. But it stayed in her mind. She tried to ignore it for a little while, but she could not. Something about that shape in the field kept bothering her. It was like her brain refused to let it go. She was looking down at her phone, but part of her attention was still on that strange brownish red bush across from her car. She told me later that it had this feeling around it, like it did not belong there. She could not explain why. It was just wrong. So she looked again. That was when everything changed. The bush was no longer just a bush. Or maybe it had never been a bush at all. My mom said it began to change shape, or at least that was how it looked to her. What she had first thought was some strange plant or clump of brush started to appear more like a body. The shape became taller, more defined, and more human-like, but not human. She said it became a humanoid creature standing in the field. She said it was huge, not just tall in the way a tall person is tall. She said it looked about 8 or 9 feet tall. That alone is terrifying to imagine. Something that size standing in an open field would already be enough to make anyone freeze. But the way she described it made it even worse. It was not shaped like a normal person. It was tall and upright, but covered in dark coloring and reddish-brown fur. She said it looked black in some areas, with brownish-red fur in others, like the color she had first mistaken for a bush. The head was the part that scared me most when she described it. She said the head looked like a wolf, not exactly a normal wolf standing on 2 legs, and not exactly a person wearing some kind of mask. She said it had a wolf-like head, but the whole thing had this strange, inky look to it. That word stayed with me. Inky, it made me picture something dark and thick-looking, like shadows had collected into a shape and then grown fur. Not clean or solid in the way an animal should look, but almost like darkness with reddish-brown hair over it. I asked her questions because I was trying to understand what she meant, but the truth is, she did not fully know how to describe it either. She kept saying it was wrong. It was too tall. It was too dark. It looked like it had fur, but also like it was made of something darker than fur. Its shape seemed real, but also not right. It was one of those things that words do not fully capture because it did not fit into anything normal. Then it looked at her. That was the moment that really shook her. She said its face, or head, turned toward her car, and it looked directly at her. Not near her, not past her, at her. She said she felt like it was looking right through her. That is exactly how she explained it. It was not just eye contact. It was worse than that. She felt seen in a way that made her feel exposed, like whatever this thing was, it could see more than her face through the windshield. She said it felt like it was looking through her body, through her thoughts, through whatever part of a person usually feels private and hidden. I know that sounds dramatic, but I believe that is how it felt to her. When she called me afterward, I could hear it in her voice. She was not telling the story like someone who had seen a weird animal and wanted attention. She sounded like someone who had been stared down by something she did not understand. There was panic in her voice, but also confusion. She was trying to make sense of it as she spoke, almost like she hoped saying it out loud would help it become normal. But it did not become normal. Because after it looked at her, it was gone. Not walked away. Not ran into the trees. Not crouched back down. Gone, she said it disappeared so suddenly that she did not know what she had seen. The shape was gone, and the bush was gone too. That detail is what makes it so strange. If it had been a bush and she had just imagined the creature, the bush should still have been there. If it had been an animal standing near a bush, then maybe the animal could have left and the bush would remain. But she said the whole thing was gone. The weird brownish red bush she first noticed was no longer there. That is when she called me. She called right after it happened, still sitting there, completely freaked out. I could tell immediately that something was wrong. My mom does not call me in that tone for no reason. She was shaken. She was trying to explain it fast, but she also kept stopping because she did not know how to make it sound believable. She knew how strange it sounded. I think that made it worse for her. She had seen something that made no sense, and now she had to say it out loud. She told me about sitting in the car. She told me about the field. She told me about the weird bush. She told me how it had been brownish red and how it did not look right. Then she told me she looked away, looked back, and the thing had changed into something tall and humanoid. She told me it looked 8 or 9 feet tall, black with reddish-brown fur, with a head like a wolf. She told me about the inky look it had. She told me it stared at her and felt like it looked right through her. Then she told me it vanished, bush and all. I did not know what to say. What do you say to something like that? Part of me wanted to give her a normal explanation because that is what people do when someone they love is scared. You try to calm them down. You say maybe it was an animal, maybe it was a shadow, maybe it was a person wearing something strange, maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe your eyes played with you because you looked away and looked back. I thought of all those things, but none of them sounded right when matched with what she described. My mom has always believed in the supernatural. She has never been the kind of person who laughs off every strange thing. She believes there are things in the world that we do not understand. But that does not mean she lies about them. In fact, it is the opposite. Because she believes in that kind of thing, she takes it seriously. She does not make up stories just for fun. She does not claim to see creatures every other week. She does not go around trying to make everything sound paranormal. And I know when my mom is lying. Most people know their parents' voices well enough to tell when something is off. I know when she is exaggerating, when she is joking, when she is trying to avoid telling the full truth, and when she is genuinely shaken. This was not a lie. Whatever she saw something. Maybe it was not what it looked like, maybe there is some explanation neither of us understands, but she was not making it up. I am sure of that. That is why it freaks me out so much. I was not there. I did not see it with my own eyes. So I cannot say exactly what it was. I cannot prove anything. I cannot say it was some kind of supernatural creature or cryptid or spirit. I cannot even say for sure that it was alive. All I can say is that my mom saw something that looked like a strange bush, then like an 8 or 9 foot tall wolf-headed humanoid figure with black and reddish-brown fur. And then it disappeared. I have thought about possible explanations. Maybe it was a large animal standing in a strange way. But what animal looks like that, stands that tall, and vanishes with the bush it was near? Maybe it was a person in a costume. But why would someone be standing in a field dressed like that? Alone, staring into a car? And how would they disappear so quickly without being seen leaving? Maybe it was a shadow or a trick of light. But my mom was looking directly at it when it changed, and she described details too specific to ignore. Maybe it was some kind of hallucination, but she was not sick, not half asleep, not drunk, not on anything, and not in some stressful situation before it happened. She was just sitting in her car using her phone. It came out of nowhere. That makes it harder to dismiss. People can misread what they see, of course. The brain can turn strange shapes into familiar or frightening things. But the fact that it looked at her, that she felt seen by it, and that it disappeared afterward, makes the whole thing much harder to file away as nothing. The part that stays with me is the way she described its stare. She did not just say it looked scary. She said it looked right through her. That phrase has a weight to it. I keep imagining her sitting there in the car, phone in her hand, alone across from that field, suddenly realizing that the thing she thought was a weird bush was now standing upright and staring at her. I imagine the silence inside the car. I imagine how small and exposed she must have felt behind the windshield. A car usually feels like protection, like a barrier between you and the outside world. But if something looks through you, even glass and metal do not feel like much. Since she told me, I have not been able to stop thinking about it. Sometimes it pops into my head randomly, and I feel that uneasy chill. I picture the brownish-red shape in the field, at first low and still like a bush. Then I picture it becoming taller, unfolding into something that should not be there. I picture the wolf-like head. I picture the dark, inky body. I picture it turning toward the car and staring. And then, nothing. No bush, no creature, just an empty field. That empty field might be the scariest part. If something stays there, at least you can keep looking at it. You can study it, explain it, take a picture, prove to yourself that it was real or not real. But when it vanishes, you are left with only the memory. You start questioning every second. Did it really happen? Did it move? Did it change? Did it look at me? What did I see? That uncertainty can be worse than the thing itself. My mom does not know what she saw. I do not know what she saw either. But I know it scared her badly enough to call me right away. I know she was not playing around. I know she was not trying to create a story. And I know the way she described it has stayed with me ever since. Maybe there is a normal explanation out there. Maybe one day someone will say exactly what kind of animal, shadow, or visual trick could have caused it, and everything will click into place. I would honestly like that. I would like to be able to say, okay, that is all it was. But so far, nothing fits. The thing that bothers me most is that it noticed her. It was not just something strange she saw from a distance. It saw her too. At least, that is how it felt to her. And when something impossible looks back at you, it becomes different. You are no longer just watching it. You are part of the moment. You are involved. I still do not know what was in that field that day. I do not know if it was a creature, a spirit, a trick of the eyes, or something else completely. All I know is that my mom saw a brownish red shape that did not look right. She looked away, looked back, and saw something tall, black, furry, wolf-headed, and inky staring straight at her. Then it disappeared. And honestly, just thinking about it still freaks me out. When I was still in the early years of medical university, I thought I understood what I was getting myself into. I knew medicine was not clean or easy. I knew hospitals were full of pain, blood, fear, and people at the worst moments of their lives. I knew doctors had to do things that most people would not be able to watch. But knowing something in theory is very different from standing in an operating room and seeing it with your own eyes. In the beginning, I was still trying to prove to myself that I belonged there. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to act like the other students who seemed calm, even when something terrible was happening in front of them. We were taught to look at the body as something we needed to understand. Organs, nerves, tissue, bones, blood supply, infection, disease, everything had a name. And if something had a name, it was supposed to become less frightening. That was what I thought, at least. But the first amputation I ever attended changed something in me. It was not like watching a lesson in a classroom. It was not like reading about a case in a textbook. It was not a diagram, not a clean picture, not a neat paragraph with symptoms and treatment written underneath. It was a real woman, an old woman. She was lying there in front of us, and her lower leg was dead from dry gangrene. The skin had turned black, almost unbelievably black, like something burnt or left in darkness too long. It did not look like part of a living body anymore, but it was still attached to a living person. That was the hardest thing to understand. The leg looked dead, but the woman was alive, breathing, afraid, and completely aware. The room was busy before the operation began. Nurses moved around, doctors prepared instruments, and everyone had a role. There were anesthetics being prepared, people checking things, people talking in low voices. To them, this was serious, but not unknown. They had seen things like this before. They knew what had to be done. They knew the leg could not be saved. The procedure was necessary. If the dead part stayed, it could endanger the rest of her body. There was logic behind everything. But logic did not make it less horrifying. I remember looking at her and thinking about how old she was. She seemed fragile in that way some elderly patients do, like life had already taken so much from her body. Her skin looked thin. Her face looked tired. There was fear in her, even before anything happened. Maybe she knew exactly what was coming. Maybe she did not understand every medical detail, but she knew enough. She knew they were going to take part of her body away. She knew she would never leave that room the same person she had been when she entered. That is something people outside medicine do not always think about. An operation is not only a technical thing. It is not just doctors doing a job and fixing a problem. For the patient, it is personal in a way no one else can fully feel. That leg had carried her through her life. It had been with her since childhood. It had taken her through streets, homes, work, family, maybe years of ordinary days that no one else remembered. And now, it was black, dead, and about to be removed. Then, in the middle of that already tense atmosphere, a radio turned on. I still do not know why there was music there, or who turned it on, or whether it had been playing quietly before and I only noticed it then. But suddenly there was a song, and the timing was so awful that it felt unreal. The song was about kissing legs. Out of all the possible songs in the world, that was what came through in that room, while an old woman was about to lose part of hers. It felt cruel, even if no one meant it that way. For a second, the room seemed to tilt into something almost absurd. A terrible, dark kind of absurd. We were standing there in a medical room with a woman prepared for amputation, and a song about legs was playing from the radio. I remember feeling this cold discomfort spread through me. It was not funny. Nobody laughed. It was too wrong to be funny. It felt like the world had chosen the worst possible sound for that moment. Then the woman started crying. Not quietly. Not with soft tears. She cried out with a sound that I still remember. It was deep and raw, almost like a roar. It came from somewhere low inside her, a place beyond ordinary crying. It was the sound of a person who was terrified, in pain, and completely trapped inside the moment. It was so intense that everyone in the room seemed to react. Even the people who were experienced, even the doctors and nurses who had seen many patients before, shook a little, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. The sound reached everyone. Her crying did not sound like fear alone. It sounded like pain, grief, and prayer all mixed together. A person can cry because something hurts. But she cried like her whole life had turned into that one unbearable moment. Then she began to pray. Her voice shook. She prayed because there was nothing else she could do. She could not run. She could not stop what was happening. She could not bargain with the disease in her leg. She was lying there, surrounded by medical staff, waiting for something terrible, but necessary to begin. She kept saying that all she felt was pain. That sentence stayed with me. All she felt was pain. Not pressure, not discomfort, not fear only, but pain. It was everywhere for her. It filled her. It was the whole world in that moment. The doctors were trying to manage it, of course. It was not that they did not care. They had given her anesthetic wherever they could. They had done what was possible. But because of her age and condition, they could not put her fully under with general anesthesia. They could not give her the kind of deep narcosis that would let her sleep through the entire thing. Her body was too weak, and the risks were too high. That made the whole situation feel even worse. There are moments in medicine where every choice is bad. If they gave her too much, it could kill her. If they gave her too little, she would suffer. If they did not remove the leg, the disease could kill her. If they did remove it, she had to face the pain and the horror of the procedure. There was no perfect answer. There was only the least terrible option, and even that option was horrifying to witness. Eventually, they gave her a piece of bandage to bite down on. That image has never left me. An old woman, frightened and hurting, biting into bandage because there was no better way to help her bear it. It felt like something from another century, not something happening in a modern medical setting. And yet there it was. The room had doctors, nurses, instruments, medicine, knowledge, and all the things that are supposed to make suffering more controlled. But in the end, she still had to bite down and endure. I remember standing there and feeling helpless. As a student, I could not do anything. I was not the surgeon. I was not the anesthesiologist. I was not even experienced enough to be useful. I was just watching. I was there to learn, but what I was learning felt unbearable. I thought medical training would teach me how to help people. That day, it taught me how limited help can feel when pain is too strong and the body is too fragile. The doctors gave her a huge amount of anesthetic, as much as they could safely give. It was placed everywhere possible. They were trying to block the pain from the tissues, the nerves, everything they could reach. For a while, it seemed to work in some ways. She did not react to everything at first the way I feared she would. The nerves in the lower part had been cut, and the dead tissue itself could not feel in the normal way. There was a strange, terrible logic to it. The leg was dead. The nerves were cut. The body part being removed should not have been able to send the same pain signals anymore. But then they reached the bone. That was when the horror of it truly settled into me. I had always thought of pain as something that came from nerves in skin and muscle. I understood, of course, that bones could hurt. Everyone knows broken bones hurt. But seeing how pain could still exist in that moment, after so much had already been numbed, after so much anesthetic had been given, made me feel sick. It was like the body had a deeper level of suffering. one that medicine could not fully silence in her case. When they began cutting the bone, she reacted. The sound she made was not something I can forget. I do not want to describe it in too much detail because even remembering it makes me feel uneasy, but it was worse than any scream I had heard before. It was not like someone being startled. It was not like someone yelling from a small injury. It was the sound of pain coming from the deepest place in a human body. It went through the room like electricity. I felt it in my stomach. Everyone remained professional because they had to. The operation could not stop just because it was horrible. That is one of the hardest truths about surgery. Sometimes the only way through suffering is to continue. Stopping halfway would not help her. It would only make things worse. So the doctors kept working, focused and serious, doing what had to be done. But I could tell that no one was untouched by it. No one in that room was made of stone. I remember thinking, this can happen to anyone. That thought hit me with more fear than I expected. Before that, illness still felt somewhat distant to me, even though I was studying medicine. I was young. I was healthy. Part of me still believed, in that quiet way young people do, that terrible things happen mostly to other people. Older people, unlucky people, patients in textbooks, patients in hospital beds. But watching that woman made the barrier disappear. She had once been young, too. She had once walked without thinking about it. She had once lived days where she probably never imagined ending up on an operating table, biting bandage while doctors removed part of her leg. It could happen to anybody, even me. That was the thought that scared me most. Not only that I might one day perform such a procedure or witness another one, but that I could one day be the person lying there. My own body could betray me. Infection, disease, age, injury, bad circulation, one unlucky event after another. The body is strong until it is not. It carries you until it fails. And when it fails badly enough, strangers in masks may have to cut away what cannot be saved. That realization changed the room around me. I was no longer only watching a patient. I was looking at a possible future for any human being. The distance between doctor and patient felt much thinner than I wanted it to be. The white coats, the gloves, the medical words, the sterile tools, all of it made us feel protected. But we were not protected from life. We were only on the other side of the table for now. After the operation, I do not remember everything clearly. Some parts of that day are sharp, and other parts are blurred. I remember the blackened leg. I remember the radio. I remember the terrible song. I remember her crying and praying. I remember the bandage in her mouth. I remember the moment when the cutting reached the bone. I remember the sound she made. But the rest of it feels like walking through fog. I think I tried to act normal afterward. Students are expected to handle difficult things. In medicine, there is often this unspoken pressure to be strong, to not show too much emotion, to not look weak in front of others. If you cannot handle blood, pain, or fear, then people may think you are not meant to be there. So I probably did what many students do. I stayed quiet. I held myself together. I told myself it was part of training. But inside, something had cracked. I could not stop thinking about her, not just as a medical case, but as a person. I wondered what her life had been like before that room. I wondered whether she had family waiting somewhere. I wondered if she knew how much her crying had affected the people around her. I wondered if she survived afterward, and if she did, what her life became. I wondered if she remembered the operation as clearly as I did, or if the mind protected her by blurring some of it. For me, the memory stayed. There were other difficult experiences during my time in medical university. There were other things I saw that were disturbing, sad, or frightening. Some happened earlier, and I do not remember them as well. Maybe my brain chose not to hold on to every detail. Maybe this amputation took up so much space in my mind that the other memories faded behind it. But this one stayed clear, because it was the first time I truly understood the horror that can exist inside medicine. Medicine is supposed to be about healing, and in many ways it is. Doctors save lives, nurses comfort people. Operations can remove disease, repair injuries, and give people more time. I know that. I respect that. But there is another side that people do not always talk about. Healing can be violent. Saving someone can mean cutting into them. Keeping someone alive can mean taking something away. Pain can still break through, even when everyone is doing their best. And sometimes the person being helped suffers so much that the help itself looks like cruelty. I could not make peace with that. The amputation was one of the reasons I eventually left medical university. It was not the only reason, but it was a major one. After that, I started questioning whether I had the kind of mind and heart that could survive in that world. Some people can witness terrible things and still continue because they know their work matters. I admire those people. I really do. But I began to realize that I was absorbing too much of the horror. I was not becoming stronger in the way I thought I would. I was becoming haunted. I did not leave because I thought medicine was wrong. I left because I was not sure I could live with what it required from me. I could not keep watching people suffer and then go home as if I had only attended another class. I could not keep telling myself that because something was medically necessary, it was not also deeply traumatic. I could not forget the sound of that woman crying. I could not forget the way everyone shook a little when she roared in pain. I could not forget the radio playing that terrible song at the worst possible moment. It sounds almost unreal now, like a cruel scene someone would write in a dark movie. An old woman with a blackened leg, a surgical room, doctors preparing to amputate, a radio playing a song about kissing legs, then her crying, her praying, her pain, and the bandage between her teeth. But it was real. I was there. I saw it. I heard it. And after that, medicine never looked the same to me again. I still think about the randomness of it. One person is born into one life, another person into another. One body stays healthy, another slowly fails. One person studies medicine, another becomes the patient. But those roles can change at any time. That was the lesson that terrified me. There is no wall separating us from suffering. There is only time, luck, and the fragile condition of our bodies. That is why the memory still scares me. Not because it was supernatural. There were no ghosts, no monsters, no shadows moving in the corner. It was scarier than that, because it was real. It was a human body breaking down. It was a person in pain that medicine could not fully remove. It was the knowledge that what happened to her could happen to anyone, even someone young and healthy, even someone standing there in a student's coat thinking they are only there to learn. I went into that room as a medical student. I left with a fear I had never felt before. And even now, when I think about that old woman, her blackened leg, her prayers, and that awful moment when the pain broke through, I remember exactly why I could not stay. I woke up one morning and immediately started throwing up something that looked like coffee grounds. At the time, I did not understand what that meant. I only knew that it was not normal. It was dark, gritty looking, and completely different from any kind of vomit I had ever seen before. Later, I learned that vomit that looks like coffee grounds can be a sign of internal bleeding. But in that moment, all I knew was that my body was doing something terrifying. And I had no idea why. I remember standing there, staring at it, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My brain wanted to find a simple explanation. Maybe I had eaten something strange. Maybe I was sick with a bad stomach bug. Maybe it looked worse than it really was. When something frightening happens to your body, sometimes your first reaction is not panic. Sometimes your first reaction is denial. You try to convince yourself that it must be something small, because the bigger answer is too scary to accept. For some reason, I decided to take a bath. Maybe I thought it would calm me down. Maybe I wanted to clean myself up and feel normal for a few minutes. Maybe I was already too sick to think clearly. But once I started getting ready, I looked down at my body and felt a different kind of fear settle over me. I was covered in huge bruises. They were not little bruises from bumping into a table or knocking my leg against a chair. These were big, dark bruises spread across my body like something had happened to me while I was asleep. I had no memory of hurting myself. I had no reason to look that way. It was like my body had been damaged from the inside out. Then, I noticed the red freckles. They were on my legs at first, tiny red dots scattered across my skin. Then I saw them in my mouth. Then, horribly, I saw them on my eyeballs. That was when I knew this was not something I could explain away. Bruises were scary enough, but red spots in my mouth and eyes made it feel like my whole body was sending distress signals. Something was wrong with my blood, even though I did not know that yet. Soon after, I learned that I had a sudden and severe blood disorder called IP. My spleen was destroying my platelets faster than my body could make new ones. Platelets are what help your blood clot, so when you do not have enough of them, your body can start bruising and bleeding in dangerous ways. That explained the bruises. It explained the tiny red dots. It explained the coffee ground vomit. But knowing the name of what was happening did not make it less terrifying. It is hard to describe how frightening it is when your own body becomes the threat. If someone breaks into your house, you can run, hide, call for help, or defend yourself. If something is outside your window, at least the danger is outside you. But when the danger is inside your blood, inside your organs, inside the systems that are supposed to keep you alive, you cannot run from it. You carry it with you. You wake up with it. You sleep with it. You look in the mirror and see signs of it spreading across your skin. For months, doctors tried different treatments, but nothing worked the way we hoped. Every treatment brought a little hope with it, and every failure took that hope away again. My life became appointments, test results, blood counts, fear, waiting, and more bad news. I was living in a constant state of worry, wondering if the next bruise would be worse, if the next internal bleed would happen without warning, or if my platelet count would drop even lower. Eventually, after months of unsuccessful treatments, I made the decision to have my spleen removed. It was not an easy choice. The surgery only had about a 50% chance of working. That meant I could go through a major operation and still not get better. But by that point, I felt like I was running out of options. I wanted a chance at getting my life back, even if the chance was not guaranteed. I was tired of living in fear of my own blood. Going into surgery was scary, but it also felt like maybe this was the beginning of the end of the nightmare. I knew there were risks. I knew nothing was certain. But I hoped that when I woke up, things would finally start moving in the right direction. I hoped the surgery would work. I hoped my body would stop attacking itself. I hoped I would be able to breathe easier, not knowing how wrong that thought would become later. When the surgery was over, I woke up with a feeding tube in my nose. That became the first thing I was aware of. Not relief, not the surgery being done, not even pain from the operation. The tube was all I could think about. It was unbelievably uncomfortable. I have some kind of weird sinus issue, apparently, because the feeling of that tube in my nose was unbearable. It was not just annoying. It felt like my body was rejecting it completely. I could feel it in my nose, down the back of my throat, and every second made me more desperate. I begged them to take it out. I kept asking because I could not stand it. I wanted it gone more than anything. I was miserable, uncomfortable, and already worn down from everything my body had been through. Finally, the doctor agreed to remove it. In my mind, once that tube was out, I would finally be able to relax a little. I thought that would be the end of that discomfort. I thought I would feel better. The doctor told me to take a deep breath. I did. Then she pulled the tube out. Immediately, I heard a huge cracking sound. It was not a small pop or a normal little body noise. It sounded wrong, deep and sudden, like something inside me had snapped or shifted in a way it never should have. At the exact same moment, I suddenly could not breathe. It felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. That is the only way I can explain it. The pressure was enormous. My chest felt crushed. I tried to pull air in, but it was like my lungs would not open. I could not get enough air. I could not talk. I could not explain what was happening. Panic hit me instantly, because breathing is not something you can calmly think through when it stops working. Your whole body starts screaming for air. I started freaking out, but I could not speak. That made everything worse. I wanted to say, I can't breathe. I wanted to tell them something was wrong. I wanted to ask for help, but I could not make the words come out. All I could do was gasp and struggle. My body was fighting for air, and my mind was filling with pure terror. They drugged me up after that. The next thing I knew, it was nighttime. I woke up alone in a hospital room, and I still could not breathe. That was the most terrifying moment of my entire life. The room was dark, and for a few seconds, I did not understand where I was. Then the panic came back all at once. I was in a hospital bed. I was weak. I could not breathe properly. I looked around and did not see a nurse. I did not see anyone standing near me. I did not see a roommate at first. I did not see an emergency button within reach. I could not get up. I could not call out. I could not even speak loud enough for help. I was trapped in my own body. Every breath was a fight. I would try to inhale, but it felt like my chest was being held down by something huge and invisible. The air would not come in the way it was supposed to. I could make horrible gurgling and gasping sounds, but they were not words. They were not enough to call anyone. They were just the sounds of a person trying not to die. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment I am going to die. I was not thinking calmly. I was not peaceful. There was no beautiful moment of acceptance. There was only fear. Raw, animal fear. The kind that takes over everything. My body wanted air, and my lungs would not give it to me. I could not sit up. I could not press a button. I could not scream. I could not tell anyone that I was dying right there in the dark. Hospitals are supposed to feel like the safest place when something is wrong. You are surrounded by doctors, nurses, machines, medicine, and people trained to save lives. But in that moment, none of that mattered because I could not reach anyone. I was alone in the dark, unable to breathe, with no way to make myself heard except for the ugly sounds coming out of my throat. That helplessness was worse than pain. Pain can be terrible, but at least you can usually cry, scream, or point to where it hurts. Not being able to breathe takes away your voice. It takes away your strength. It turns the whole world into one tiny, desperate need. Air. Nothing else matters. Not the surgery. Not the blood disorder. Not the hospital. Not tomorrow. Just the next breath. I kept gasping. I kept making those awful gurgling sounds. I was sure no one could hear me. I thought I was going to die alone in that room after surviving everything else. I thought about how unfair it felt, how strange it was that after months of fighting this blood disorder and going through surgery, I might die because I woke up unable to breathe and could not call for help. Then, by some miracle, my roommate woke up. I had not realized I had one. From where I was lying, I could not see her. In my panic, I thought I was completely alone. But she was there, and the sounds I was making woke her up. She realized something was wrong and called for help. I still think about that. If she had slept through it, I do not know what would have happened. If she had ignored it, or if I had been alone, I might not be here. My life may have depended on another patient waking up in the middle of the night because she heard me gasping for air. Once help came, everything moved quickly. Doctors and nurses came in. They realized this was serious. Eventually, they found out that I had massive pulmonary embolisms in my lungs. Blood clots had traveled to my lungs and were blocking blood flow. That was why I could not breathe. That was why it felt like something was crushing my chest. It was not panic. It was not me overreacting. I was in real, immediate danger. After that, I was put into a medically induced coma in the ICU for a week until I was stable again. A whole week of my life disappeared while doctors worked to keep me alive. I do not remember that part clearly because I was not conscious for it, and maybe that is a blessing. The part I do remember is enough. I remember waking up at night. I remember the darkness. I remember the pressure in my chest. I remember searching for a nurse, a button, anyone, and finding nothing. I remember gasping and thinking I was about to die. When I finally became stable and learned what had happened, it was strange to hear it explained in medical words. Massive pulmonary embolisms, ICU, medically induced coma. Blood clots. Those words are serious, but they sound clean compared to what it felt like. They do not capture the terror of lying there unable to breathe. They do not capture the feeling of being trapped inside your own failing body. They do not capture the moment when you realize you might not survive long enough for someone to notice. The whole experience changed the way I think about fear. Before that, I thought fear was something outside you, a dangerous person, a dark road, a strange noise in the house. But the worst fear I have ever felt came from inside my own body. My blood would not clot properly. My spleen was destroying my platelets. My body was covered in bruises and red spots. Then, after surgery, blood clots nearly killed me by blocking my lungs. There was nowhere to run from that. I survived, but surviving does not erase what happened. I still remember the coffee ground vomit and the shock of learning it meant internal bleeding. I still remember seeing bruises all over my body and red freckles in places they should never be. I still remember the months of treatments that did not work. I remember choosing surgery even though it only had a 50% chance of helping. I remember waking up with that feeding tube and begging for it to be removed. I remember the crack, the pressure, and the sudden loss of breath. Most of all, I remember that hospital room at night. I remember being alone, or thinking I was alone. I remember not being able to speak. I remember the panic of looking around and realizing I could not get to help. I remember my body making those awful sounds because it was the only thing it could do. I remember thinking, with complete certainty, that I was going to die right there. That was the single most terrifying moment of my life. I am grateful my roommate woke up. I am grateful she called for help. I am grateful the doctors were able to stabilize me. I am grateful I woke up after that week in the ICU. But gratitude does not erase the terror. It only sits beside it. The scariest part is knowing how quickly it all happened. One morning, I woke up and threw up something that looked like coffee grounds. Not long after, I learned my blood was failing me. Months later, I had surgery. Then, after surgery, I nearly died because my lungs were full of clots. Life can change that fast. Your body can become dangerous that fast. One moment you think you are recovering, and the next you are gasping in the dark, praying someone hears you. I lived through it, but I will never forget it. Nothing has ever scared me more than the moment I woke up in that hospital room, unable to breathe, unable to speak, unable to move, and completely sure that death had finally caught up with me.